a member of the midnight crew.
Ao woo, friends and enemies. It is I, Cureve. Give me just a moment. There we go. Welcome to my first ever Homestuck stream. It's a special occasion for a holiday. Yay! I'm doomed. Anyway, so, Classpecting. What is it? Let me just move this over. Move this over. Yeah, no. Back. Right, hold on. I'll just close that. There we go. Classpecting is the process by which one combines an aspect and a class, along with lunar sway, to determine one's archetype within the Homestuck multiverse. So there are 14 classes that are main canon. There are a few joke classes which will be discussed. Hold on. Did I remember to put the joke classes one in here? No, I did not. I need the joke classes just to relieve tension before we get. Yeah, there we go. So we're going to be watching something explaining aspects, classes, and follow-up in response to the main aspects essay and the joke stuff, or joke class specs, if you will. There are a few joke class specs that are also canon. However, they're not main canon like these 14 classes and the 12 main aspects. Furthermore, Classpecting includes any one of all of these alternative zodiac signs. As you can see here, at the top, we have the Earth zodiac. However, Earth's zodiac expanded includes every single possible troll zodiac. So, what I've done is I've created a helpful little chart using the two alters who did this survey / bullshit, because that's what this is, in their own time without my permission. But we have compiled a dump text link to every little bit of source information. And the alters in question are our Carcat alter, who tested out to be exactly the same as his Homestuck counterpart when it comes to his Classpect, and our Dave Strider fictive, who also tested to be exactly like his fictional counterpart when it comes to his Classpect, except for his sign, which I will go ahead and read that. If your true sign is Camrys, you possess the unique combination of qualities held by all Lime signs, Durst Dreamers, and Timebound. Lime signs are tumultuous, bringing great emotion, yada yada yada. But we'll get to that. We will definitely get to that. But I am going to go ahead and mute so we can clean our room while studying for this mess of attempting to assign class specs to any of me who are willing to come forward. I, as primary host, and my twin as secondary host, and all of the host subsystem members are going to do this, at the very least. That being said, we've already had quite a few signups and a few dropouts, so we'll see who winds up being the ones doing it. Also, when I do open the floor to my Discord server, I've created a copy of this using Carcat and Dave still as examples for any member of my Discord server who is willing to jump in and, actually take the quiz. The poor dears. But yeah, I've created a separate tab for them in case they want to get in on this mess. Without further ado, let's start studying.
Hello, my name is Funk McLovin. This video and essay is part of SOCCON 2024 and marks my 4th year contributing an unhinged, Homestuck-related diatribe to you, my slavering viewers. First of all, I would like to thank Yoitz Crow and Janiyah Riley for creating and producing SOCCON, as well as Andrew Hussey and James Roach for reaching out to partner with the event for the first time ever. To you, the viewers, either participating at Stuck at Home Con or watching in the future, welcome. I hope you enjoy the next hour of force-fed information crammed down your unwavering pie hole. If you would prefer a podcast version of this video to listen to in your car or while cooking or something, I've made one available for free on my Patreon, link in the description.
Oh yes, go support Funk McLovin if you have the funds, because he does good Homestuck work.
Part 1. Prelude to the Rabbit Hole, in which theses are shared and rationales explained. Classpecting has been part of Homestuck since its very beginning. Homestuck's core appeal has always been as a fandom playground, a place people can go to make their own fan trolls and creations based on the work, and Classpecting is one of the most mysterious elements to that end. 12 aspects and 14 classes to sort Homestuck's characters into, like Hogwarts houses or bending elements, except more vague and conceptual. In 2014, the extended Zodiac was released, codifying much of what had up until that point been speculation by fan theorists such as Bladekind Eyewear on Tumblr and Optimistic Duelist on YouTube. But the Izod raised more questions than answers, igniting a fire in people to figure out just what the hell was going on. Whether it be scholars trying to apply the framework of Homestuck, such as O Pacifica, or people trying to fit the Classpect system over other media, like Will at Homestuck, love letters to Classpecting have been written in digital ink spanning miles. In the year 2024, things have quieted down. Optimistic Duelist has been gone for some time, and the majority of fan creators are presently spending their efforts making visual novels and stirring up drama. Is the study of Classpecting dead and gone? Have the knowledge and mysteries been plumbed from the depths once and for all? This video seeks to push Classpecting forward. I, for one, am tired of the stagnation, and I am sick of being the only person discussing this topic. I want to bring Classpecting out of esoterica for a modern age. I want to depart from the drab and dusty ways of old, however learned their advocates are. Reignite the fire of inspiration and temper something new with you, the listener. This video will be the first part of a series. First, we will discuss only aspect in this video, with 2 follow-ups covering class and classpect, respectively. What I hope to achieve is an understanding of aspect so comprehensive the book can be summarily closed on the past, so we can move into the future. This is no small task. There have been many writings on aspect to date, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Sifting through this miasma has been a goose chase of only the wildest caliber. The simple fact of the matter is that up until now, discussion of aspect is stiflingly limited. No matter how broad of a scope I applied to my research, I found only one undercurrent: duality. The dualist system for measuring aspect is so ubiquitous that I couldn't find a single source that offered another kind of formula. To be fair, dualism is very broad as analytical frameworks go, but this limitation is the shackle that I want to break free from and end this era of dualist understanding. There are more numbers than 1 and 2, people. There are more spectra than you can even imagine. Let me show them to you. Part 2. Allegory of the Cave, in which shadows dance upon the walls. Alright, so before leaping cockfirst into this snake pit, let's make sure our feet are planted firmly here. What the fuck is an aspect? We use that word a lot. You probably even thought of something in your brain right now, but let's wrangle that thought into a workable meaning that we can feel proud to ride into town square on. Aspect, reflexively speaking, is the general name given to the collective aspects: breath, time, doom, light, void, space, blood, life, rage, hope, mind, and heart. More on these momentarily, but aspect refers to these items and concepts in a group. They are, collectively, the building blocks of a subjective reality. You could think of them as elements, or, unlike the elements of the periodic table or the elements of antiquity, earth, wind, fire, and water, these elements do not seek to describe some concrete reality as it is. Aspect could be understood as the elements of perception, the building blocks of how we interpret subjectively an objective reality, if an objective reality really exists. A notion such as this could be understood as a subjectivist philosophy. For more reading, look up Thomas Hobbes and René Descartes. As discussed, there are 12 aspects, each one denoted by a single monosyllabic word. Each one is blunt, each one is vague, and most of all, each one is staunchly opaque. They are, in essence, symbols without an original, each one representing something in terms that change with the viewer, intentionally so. There have been many attempts to make these aspects more concrete by applying other descriptions to them. This must be done with great care. One must never assume they know an aspect, for you know what they say about assuming. Instead, think of it this way. Each aspect is a pool, its depths inscrutable to the viewer. The surface of the pool is the aspect's name, named only to differentiate its nature from its neighbors. We may reach inside and know something of the pool within. We may pull out further descriptions, but we will never understand the true depth of these pools without sophisticated techniques and unnameable methods. For now, to get a more familiar and emotional sense of each aspect, let's apply each one some more words to properly define what they are associated with. Call this a word association therapy. The following are in no particular order: breath, breathing, air, wind, flight, freedom, blue, games, fantasies, void, ambiguity, nothingness, no answer, comfort, solitude, potential, black. Light, knowledge, decisions, literature, rules, luck, intrigue, yellow, brightness. Doom, death, destiny, fate, decay, entropy, programming, utility, darkness. Time, clocks, mathematics, order, red, sequence, music, coolness, industry, inevitability. Space, stars, distance, speed, size, specificity, breeding, universes, power, monochrome, hope, smiles, determination, effort, story, catharsis, white, yellow, life, abundance, growth, economy, status, wealth, prosperity. Green. Heart, emotions, control, facade, consciousness, relationships, skill. Mind, choice, patterns, intelligence, structure, justice. Games, knowledge, rage, revolution, anger, contrivance, motion, chaos, power. Theater, blood, lineage, bonds, society, responsibility, care, leading, righteousness. Subjectivity has two components: stimulus and reaction. What stimulates us, and how do we react to it? In simpler terms, what happens and why? In this way, each aspect has a concrete nature, something we have no control over, and an abstract nature, something we have agency over. For instance, the flow of time cannot be controlled by us, but what we do with our limited time is under our control. This is not the only example involving time, but I will be using concrete and abstract going forward. You may have noticed in the definitions some words overlap. Aspects and their associations have certain traits in common with each other, and have significant overlap in some cases. The only trait that is explicitly mutually exclusive is the aspect's name and symbol. This might not seem like much, but it is indeed everything. Searching for concrete meaning in aspects is pointless. Many have tried, but all their answers have ended in products without catharsis nor bite. That is not to say meaning cannot be drawn, only that aspect cannot be boxed away in easy-to-parse little boxes for us to peruse like items on shelves. They are, as said, symbols without originals. The more we try to tie them down, the less we are able to understand. Try to guess the true nature of an aspect would be like shaving bark off a majestic tree and saying, "Behold, the tree itself." The tree is a changing, organic thing. Its meaning does not exist inside its rings or in the molecules of its bark. It exists in what we feel, looking upon it. In the end, the question, what is an aspect, is not important at all. Each one is a viable way to both interpret the world and affect it in turn. Understanding them is to enter the mental world.
And now you see why we want to do this. Because our mental world is full of a bunch of assholes who need to at least figure out some of their place. Yeah, you all heard me right. You're the ones who voted for this. Neither I nor my twin wanted this. We're doing this for you idiots. Anyway, that being said, but yes, we just had to basically tell Larissa and Tony and a bunch of other parts of me off just now. Apologies for that. But yeah, the way I think of the aspects is sort of like the entities from Magnus Archives. They are both literal and figurative. And the more you try to figure out how much of them is figurative, the more you find is literal. And the more you try to find the literal, the more you find the figurative. It's really baffling. But let's continue.
Part 3. Extant Bullshit, in which names are dropped and ideas are placed carefully on pedestals. With a working understanding, quote-unquote, of aspect in development, let's move on. It's not enough to say something is something. We have to inspect what is means. In simpler terms, okay, we know what an aspect is, so what? Many people have tried their hands at working an explanation for all of this. Some have tried in vain to pin down a definition for every single aspect, and some have tried in vain to explain something that doesn't require explaining. But for the most part, everyone I read had something to say about the unfathomable depths we find ourselves up to the dick in. I have a few theorists that I'd like to put under the old microscope. Some names you know, some names you don't. Subject 1. Optimistic Dualist. First of all, wow. Total genius. OD is probably the most involved class-specting guy out there. Of all the people in this section, OD is most likely the most knowledgeable when it comes to intuiting aspect. OD remains one of the only creators who commits to the notion of total subjectivity and doesn't fall for the trap of trying to define their way out of vagueness. OD has a vast catalog of class-specting information. Some of it's corroborated by other people like Argus, but for this video I'd like to go into detail about some specific quotes and claims from 3 videos. The first video is Hero Titles and the Aspect Wheels Part 1 and 2. OD rightly states that class-spects are a hyperflexible mythology that defines, quote, reality as perceived by the livers. They also rightly compare all this to the idea of narrative, or the human tendency to rationalize chaotic events as stories. In the first video, Hero Titles, OD outlines the dualistic interpretation of Classpect, comparing it to the Gnostic notion of light and darkness, or order versus chaos, yin versus yang. Balance of forces is a strong theme. They also call Classpects a source of power, specifically to the players in Homestuck, that they use these powers of a reductive system that breaks the universe down into its constituent parts to give players agency over them. In the next 2 videos, OD goes into more detail on aspect specifically. OD goes into the aspect wheel as depicted by the Izod, or extended zodiac, and makes several geometric comparisons. The most common geometric analysis of the aspect wheel is to identify which aspects are across from each other and identify what they have in common. This duality predates Optimistic Dualist, but they don't stop there. There are other ways to interpret dualism on the Izod wheel, such as to fold it over and treat the north-south and east-west aspects as axes on which to interpret the other aspects. For example, aspects closer to space are more spacey, and likewise for time. This is what I'll refer to as polar analysis, making time-space and breath-blood a sort of axis system by which to measure the remaining 8 aspects. OD also makes note of how some aspects appear more than others, both in comic and in real life with regards to the Izod test. All in all, Optimistic Dualist has a firm grasp on aspect in a conceptual sense, but relies heavily on dualism. Dualism is going to come up later. I put their work first because a lot of it covers what lesser analysts are trying to ape, and a lot of other meta about Classpect is just OD's work repackaged in some fashion. Subject 2. Bladekind Eyewear. When it comes to Classpect, BQ, Bladekind Eyewear, is the first word. A lot of Optimistic Dualist's work echoes BQ's with a fresh coat of paint and more allusions to literature and mythology. Primarily, BQ was out here discussing dualism before the Izod even existed. The aspect wheel we know, as part of the Izod, comes from scholars like BQ and their theories on aspects as they existed while the comic was still coming out. Bladekind Eyewear's biggest contribution is the way they cite everything very meticulously. Bladekind Eyewear's idea of dualism, and I feel safe in saying everyone's ideal of dualism and aspects, seems to come from the following passage from Homestuck, spoken by Callie. Quote, "For instance, a hero of life and a hero of doom has aspects as different as can be. But if their classes are different enough as well, that is, one active and the other passive, remarkably, there is a chance that they could end up with a very similar abilities." End quote. Doom and life are specifically drawn in contrast. They are as different as can be, and yet can complement each other somehow. It's easy to see how an idea sprang forth from this. Sadly, I don't have a lot to say about BQ because a lot of my research was stymied by the fact that some of the posts that BQ was responding to on their Tumblr simply no longer exist. Their work still does, and they're still writing today as a matter of fact, but much of the original meta is lost because of the piecemeal fashion BQ uses for discourse. In general, Bladekind Eyewear was a titan of influence, the font from which most modern ideas flow from. But a lot of the ideas they designed seem like they are trying to stretch to fit over their ideas. Confirmation bias runs rampant in this early era of analysis. Subject 3. Ourobarista. Ourobarista is a champion of digesting information. In terms of approachability, I would suggest anyone looking for a crash course on Classpect should start with Ouro. OB's theories aren't so much theories as existing theories presented in a more digestible format, such as dualism and polar analysis as discussed, but he has a firm grasp on the material, a true teacher. Most prominently, he seems to be open to the idea of subjectivity, stating in his video A Treatise on Classpecting that what we have to go on when it comes to this system is, quote, fragmentary evidence by unreliable narrators. He also goes more into Jungian comparisons than OD's Gnostic ones, but let's be real here. Jung and Gnosticism go hand in hand. Another idea seemingly unique to Ouro is his notion of aspects not as the passive elements, but as eldritch nature gods, presumably with some kind of willpower of their own. This invites comparison to Greco-Roman myth, as well as comparisons to the Trinity. Platonism and forms also come up.
Point of order. This creator he's talking about right now matches my theory on what the aspects are. But I think Funk McLovin's take on aspects is also a little bit closer to the mark. So, let's continue.
The idea of gods is of interest in the way that he centers self-perpetuation as a goal and the servants of certain aspects. The goal of each player is to bring more of their aspect into the universe. After this overview, Ouro goes into, you guessed it, dualism. Like OD, he crafts several kinds of polar analysis of how certain aspects relate to each other across the axes. Interestingly, his polar analysis doesn't stop at time, space, breath, and blood. He posits that there are other ways to fold the wheel, with different aspects as the poles, say heart and mind. Though he brings up this fascinating idea, he fails to expand on it, rather frustratingly. Subject 4. O Pacifica. Of all the research I did for this video, I was perhaps never inspired more than in reading O Pacifica's work. Though short, their analysis is both something new and something old. It is a repackaging of dualist analysis through a brand new lens. This is a summary of their aspect theory essay on Archive of Our Own. Firstly, they state that, quote, all characters have a relationship to each aspect, end quote, which seems to me to be analogous to aspects being some kind of stat system in a video game. Perhaps one goes god tier based on how high their various stats are. O Pacifica refers to a hero's given aspect as indicative of their narrative journey. Their main theory is based around a repackaging of dualism from a biological perspective. They see aspect pairs as part of two sort of axes, aspects in an objective or fundamental form, then those same aspects in mutated, delinquent, and instrumental, ideal forms. This all gets pretty heady, and if you like to check out more, check out this writer, because their ideas come with something I feel no other aspect system seems to, an actual lens. O Pacifica mentions that they are specifically a biologist and has strived to fit aspects over a biological analogy. I find this very fitting. Aspects are symbols, they are building blocks to stories. It's only natural that we try to stretch them over real-world fields of study. Imagine an aspect system based on, say, math, or physics, or music. You get the idea. Subject 5, Dewdrop. To those in the know, there is no name more infamous than Dewdrop.
Prepare for bullshit. Dewdrop is an amazing creator when it comes to dealing with class. When it comes to dealing with aspects, oh boy. We're about to get it.
If I complained about O Pacifica not being thorough enough, Dewdrop is far too thorough. Dewdrop is the author of and these are big scare quotes coming up, a brochure detailing his thoughts about class and aspect. I will have significantly more to say on Dewdrop in the class follow-up to this video. Dewdrop's current pamphlet has undergone 17 drafts, and finding it requires knowing a guy who knows a guy with the Dropbox link. In spite of this, his work has become, I don't want to say influential, it's more like his work has caused a memetic cognito hazard to everyone who has read it. The brochure, as he calls it, is 166 pages full of the most head-ass footnotes I have ever read in my life, some footnotes constituting entire pages. This is the magnum opus of the most demented hyperfixated kind, and even though I disagree with nearly every droplet of digital ink, I am endlessly fascinated by his writing. I've mentioned the idea of vibes in reference to aspects. The idea that an aspect in class, by extension, can only be felt in some intuitive sense and justified post hoc. Dewdrop takes the complete fucking opposite tack, that Classpect is not only real, but measurable, testable, and objective. Dewdrop's idea of Classpect is completely haunting to me. He Classpects not only himself as a page of time, but also his friends and family, attributing real behaviors to their Classpects and attempting some kind of unhinged diagnosis of their idiosyncrasies through the lens of an underexplored lore item from a 2009 webcomic. Later in this document, I'm going to be making some lofty head-ass claims myself about the importance and utility of aspect, but I feel Dewdrop's rambling manifesto has put me in check in my urge to wax philosophical. Also, for those curious about what he thinks of aspects, he does the usual thing. It's more dualism. Moving on. Subject 6. Danny. Danny Witch of Light is a Tumblr blogger whose blog first shows up when one searches for aspects by name online. This is because, unlike other theorists, whose approaches are usually holistic, Danny chooses a more piecemeal approach. Danny has an article for each aspect, organized by a description from the EZOD, and their own description, and some keywords. They then describe each aspect through the lens of each class in turn, using standard nomenclature such as destroys or invites and such. Danny I find to be an efficient synthesis of information, as well as an intuitive person who is able to quickly and accurately describe how each aspect would interact through class. I find their contribution most useful if you're having trouble classpecting yourself or trying to identify a classpect of a fictional character. Subject 7. Classpect Anon. Classpect Anon, a personal friend of mine, is another Tumblr blogger whose work is significantly less centralized than the others discussed here. Instead of a systematic explanation and reinforcing existing ideas, CA seems to take a broader and more in-depth exploration. Recently, they have explored the notion of the nareme, a singular unit of narrative that they claim that aspects reflect. Naremes reflect the building blocks of our reality, namely matter and atoms, as the building blocks of the Homestuck reality and the way it interacts. CA also has various quizzes that serve as a more comprehensive version of the EZOD quiz. I like CA's notions, but I find them limited by, you guessed it, aspect dualism. They're more open-minded and have a more quixotic view of things, and they'll come up again later when class is discussed. Part 4. The Rolling of Sisyphus's Boulder, in which rationale...
But yes, all of those creators, including the one that both Bunk McLovin and I dislike. Like, it's not that he's a bad guy. He just went too deep and went too literal. When word of God from the author, it's a lot more subjective than that. So, go check them out. If you're watching the VOD, rewind, look them up, look up their shit. It's all good information for Classpecting, including that one guy. So, let's continue.
Smells are explored, destroyed, and explored again. Part 4, Part 1. Pieces of the Kintsukuroi. With the current meta, Classpects and specifically Aspect are somewhat bound to a dualist system. We can see there are many kinds of dualist systems, from a strictly geometric opposites-based system to a polar system. A system based on symmetrical geometry such as this suffers from a number of shortcomings that no current system addresses. Firstly, there is the inconsistency problem. In a geometric system of opposites, where time and space correlate as do blood and breath, the opposites on the existing wheel do not always represent their counterpart in the same fashion. For instance, time and space and breath and blood as two different pairs represent a complementary system. You need time and space to form existence, and you need breath and blood to be alive. They are continuums. On the other hand, what should we make of light and void? These aspects are mutually exclusive. As light increases, darkness recedes, and vice versa. They are not continua, they are spectra. Some opposites are a complementary system, and some opposites, geometrically, are mutually exclusive. Secondly, there is the variety problem. In a geometric system of a limited kind, there are only so many relationships that can be drawn. Heart, for instance, is the opposite to mind and across from void. No information can be gleaned about the relationship between, say, heart and time, as there is no strong corollary for aspects adjacent to each other. This runs against what we see in Homestuck itself. Dave, time, and Hart, Dirk, have a very important relationship that the current system has no insight into. Thirdly, there is the rigidity problem. When we are drawing geometric conclusions, it is very easy to rule out certain intuitive ideas. For example, in the current system, we may think of void as being opposite to light, and while the two aspects do share themes, void also shares themes with space, even down to the aspect symbol being an inversion of space's symbol. In this way, void is also the opposite to space, but there's no accounting for this in the rigid system of opposites. Fourthly, there is the specificity problem. This is considerably more vague than the first three problems. The issue in the broad strokes of trying to make a geometric system is that an attempt to classify what evades classification, drawing conclusions about things that it is not useful to draw conclusions about. Think of it this way. Does a geometric system make you further think about the nature of aspects themselves, or does a geometric system make you further think about only that geometric system? When you construct a system, it should be harmonious with its constituent parts, but the geometric aspect wheel only serves to flatten aspects and put them into boxes. A fly pinned to a board can show us the nature of a fly, but what does that pinned, dead fly lack? For a system to suit a symbolic series like the aspects, there needs to be constructed a means to better observe these aspects in context, not arranged in a predetermined order. In short, when we're talking about the aspect wheel, we're not talking about aspects, we're talking about the aspect wheel. The four problems, inconsistency, variety, rigidity, and specificity, are issues that can be circumvented. More importantly, they can be circumvented using the system that currently exists. I have so far been critical of dualism, but I would like to be careful not to throw the paradox baby with the ecto-slime, as it were. What in the geometric system is worth preserving? The aspect wheel, as it appears in the Izod for starters, I find actually very useful as a reference. The number 12 is very harmonious and significant. Mathematically, it is a highly composite number, containing 4 divisors, 2, 3, 4, and 6. 4 divisors to 12 is the highest ratio of divisors to natural position in mathematics. There are, of course, 12 hours in each unit of each day, and aspects share a dodecagon with the clock face that we have used for millennia. 12 Olympians, 12 sons of Abraham, 12 apostles of Jesus, 12 days of Christmas, 12 names of Hanuman, 12 battles of King Arthur, 12 months in a year, 12 atoms in magnesium, 12 cranial nerves in the human body, 12 functions on our keyboard, 12 muffins in a dozen, 12 Angry Man, Ocean's 12, 12 books in the Aeneid. Now, to be fair, it's very easy to do this for any number. Numerology is a game of coincidence, but the number 12 seems to have particular significance to both stories and to the human brain. 12 seems to come up whenever a big important number is needed, a number with some fucking gravitas. Part 4, Part 2. Music of the Spheres. You know what other system of 12 is heavily based on context, vibes, and symbolism? Music is fascinating because in spite of all the theory and mathematics involved, all music and all theory is utterly lacking when compared to the practice of music. In other words, there is no one meaning of any one note. Every relationship is predicated on context. Like notes, aspects and how they appear is predicated on context. Even aspect pairs that are identical have wildly different interactions given different circumstances. Tavros and John share themes and an aspect, but when paired with Vriska, they act completely differently. On paper, a light player is helping a breath player grow, but in both cases, the results couldn't be more different. Similar to chosen aspects, people who play music often gravitate towards a few musical keys based on which instrument they play or what pieces they know. Brass players like playing in B flat, where pianists enjoy playing in C, but those who play mixed ensembles might enjoy the key of F between those two. People usually pick their class spec based on that vague sense of gravitation born from both circumstance and preference. Like notes, aspect have in and of themselves a nature that can be examined and identified. C is different than D. Time is different than life. Like notes, each aspect has a nature, but not a distinct meaning. Meaning can only be derived by the complex interplay of what came before and what follows, analyzed only as subjective listeners. This creates a system where meaning has near infinite permutations that change depending on the subjective listener, but can be traced back to definitive natures that are worth examining. Nature here means, for example, a note's actual pitch or an aspect's actual name and symbol, where meaning here means a note's feeling in context or an aspect's expression in a narrative. Nature is the plain fact that middle A is 440 Hz, where meaning is the way the note A makes you feel when it's played in a piece. In a simpler way, much like there is a music theory that seeks to in some way codify the interplay of notes, I wish to construct an aspect theory that seeks to in some way codify the interplay of aspects. In simplest terms, it is a meeting of the objective and subjective constructed in order to better understand the system we are participating in. Though no one has written about this to my knowledge, I didn't actually pull vibes theory out of my ass. There is in-comic precedent for the musicality of aspects, namely the oft-forgotten Frey motifs. Frey motifs, according to Hussey's commentary, are battle techniques that he once intended to be part of a hero's arsenal. They are all associated with an aspect. Sold in consort-run shops, and certain Frey motifs incorporate multiple aspect users to function. All of them have music-themed names like Mixolydian Maelstrom or Feather Cadence. It seems these were intended for incorporation at some point, but were dropped like many other lore tidbits. Early in the comic as well, characters were often related to certain musical instruments or endeavors. This only really applied to the beta kids. John on piano, Dave as a DJ, Jade with a bass and flute, and Rose with her violin. But these remained as a general motif throughout the comic. But it's enough to get readers sniffing the direction of music and aspect overlapping. Homestuck and music are so intertwined, it's hard for me to believe that this has never been documented before. There's a whole Homestuck music wiki. Music is integral to the identity of the comic itself. Part 4, Part 3. Due Diligence of the Deranged.
Get ready for a wallop.
I'm willing to assume most people watching this video are unfamiliar with music theory. To those people, I've prepared a short primer on the topic to make the rest of this flagrant bullshit comprehensible. To those already familiar with music theory, I have strived to make this recap novel for your sake. As I said before, much like with aspects, there are 12 different notes that are utilized in Western music theory. That's it. Nearly all of the melodies and harmonies you listen to are constructed from these 12 notes. 7 of these notes are given letter names, A through G, and the remaining 5, raised or lowered versions of these letter names, called flats or sharps. The space between every note is the same, called a half step or a minor second. Once the cycle of notes is completed, the cycle repeats, but higher in pitch. This cycle is known as an octave. For instance, these are both the note of C repeated in a higher and lower pitch. They are the same note, more or less, because they have pitches whose sound waves are precisely half or a 2-to-1 ratio. The science of pitch is very interesting, but we shall have to skip it for now. The 12 notes are not only arranged over one another, however. They can be also arranged into the circle of fifths, a circle where each note is listed not by half step or minor second, but by 7 half steps, an interval known as the perfect fifth. Don't worry about the numbers right now and the inconsistencies and the halves and the sevens, just worry about the word fifth. The reasons these notes are arranged in this way are myriad, but primarily it is for a quick reference to how different keys are constructed. A key, or scale, is a series of notes that form a more pleasing arrangement. Each scale has a certain number of notes that are flat or sharp, and each clockwise increment around the scale indicates an additional raised note in that key, and each anti-clockwise increment indicates an additional lowered note. In simpler terms, it's a reference to find information about the scale that is built on that particular note. The major key of C has 0 flats or sharps. The major key that begins on F has 1 flat, and the major key that begins on A has 3 sharps. Now that we have the circle of fifths, you've probably noticed that it looks just like, now you're getting it. The concept we should talk about next is the idea of interval. Interval refers to the relationship or distance between two notes. These intervals all have a particular quality to them that is distinctive and recognizable. For instance, the notes C and G are a fifth apart, as are the notes D flat and A flat. The musical distance between intervals are where they get their names. I've already talked about a few intervals like the minor second and perfect fifth. Don't worry about the nomenclature right now, there will be more on this later. Intervals can be either stepwise if played in order, or simultaneous if played at the same time. In sum, music as a theory is the study of intervals, notes, and rhythms. The notes and their respective relationships are very simple, but in concert, literally, they form the basis for every piece of music created in the Western tradition.
You see why I like this guy's theory, right? And why I'm sharing it? Because this guy's theory on aspects vibes really well with the bard in the head and the DJ in the head. The DJ in the head being the person who already took the quiz. So, let's continue, shall we?
From Bach to Nickelback. Part 5. The irritable tap of the conductor's baton, in which the viewer comprehends that all up until now has been but a prelude. Part 5, Part 1. So what? To synthesize what I have so far insinuated, I have several problems with aspect theory as it presently exists. First, the problem of dualism and how it limits discussion to opposite pairs. Second, how this dualism fails to describe the relationship between aspects properly. I have posited that there is instead a more complex and comprehensive way to describe aspects in a systemic fashion. Vibes theory. Much like the intervals in music, we can draw intervals between the aspects and create a complex interchange between them by identifying these intervals. This creates a new system where every one of the 12 aspects has a unique interval between itself and each other aspect around the wheel. Just like in music theory, the intervals depend on which note or aspect comes first. So C and D, major second, have a different interval between them than D and C, minor 7. Let's take an example. According to the circle of fifths, breath and life are adjacent to each other. Breath is a perfect fifth away from life, and life is a perfect fourth away from breath. We can see how this impacts characters like John and Jane. These intervals are harmonious, and we can see certain similarities between John and Jane, from being part of the same family to sharing interests like pranking. However, The perfect fourth is a somewhat dissonant interval when used in melodies. We can see this reflected in how Jane exists in John's shadow to some extent. Jane is the leader of her session, but she is stunted and broken, as is her session. This is the fashion that this analysis will take. Identifying an interval, then identifying traits that indicate how that interval informs the relationship between two characters. The interval could be said to be how an aspect interacts with another, and using this theory, you could create new characters and new interactions for your own projects, or use the intervals to identify relationships between characters in other media. Part 5, Part 2. Alchemy-like into wisdom.
Before we continue, you do see how this would be important for the purposes of trying to get interpersonal communication between different alters in a DID system to function cohesively. If one can properly identify the aspect that best fits each alter, you can then, in turn, determine the best means by which one could, facilitate communication. Dave, Carcat, I can't believe you're making me say this. But thank you. Fuck you. But thank you. Continuing.
All aspects have two halves to the wheel, separated by the tritone at the bottom. The major series and the minor series. Aspects are either major, which appear in the major scale, minor, which appear in the minor scale, diatonic, which appear in both scales, or non-diatonic, that don't appear in any scale. Major third, major sixth, major seventh are major. Minor third, minor sixth, minor seventh are minor. Unison, major second, perfect fourth, and perfect fifth are diatonic, and minor second and tritone are non-diatonic. Diatonic could be understood as compatible aspects. These would be directly adjacent aspects and the second clockwise aspect. These aspects are similar thematically or have some form of overlap with the point of view aspect. Example, John, Jake, and Jane being reflections of the same archetype. Major could be understood as familiar aspects. These would be third, fourth, and fifth clockwise aspects. These aspects are comprehensible to the POV aspect. This does not necessarily indicate a positive relationship. Examples are John and Dave and John and Rose. Minor could be understood as the unfamiliar aspects. These would be the aspects on the leftmost side. These aspects have a relationship with the POV aspect marked by strife, either external strife to overcome together, or internal strife that causes clashes. Example, John and Terezi, and John and Roxy. Non-diatonic could be considered the alien aspects. These would be the parallel aspect, the aspect one clockwise from the parallel aspect. These are the aspects that the POV aspect has the most difficulty understanding. This does not necessarily indicate a negative relationship, simply a lack of common ideological ground. Example, John and Carcat. Major and minor are colloquially understood as happy and sad, and while this is often true, it is not always true, perhaps not even usually. Major key songs can be sad, like Hallelujah, and minor key songs can be happy, like Happy Together. Major key songs also incorporate minor chords, and minor songs incorporate major chords. A better word to describe major versus minor is light versus dark in terms of sound quality. It is the interplay of these sounds that creates music, just as it is the interplay of aspects that creates stories. Intervals also have inversions, which describes the interval if the two notes were flipped. For instance, the space between a C and a G is a perfect fifth, but when you change this interval to G and C, even though you're comparing the same notes, the distance is different. G to C is a perfect fourth. If that is the case, then it must be true that there are a total of 144 unique intervals between each note, and 144 unique intervals between each aspect. Now you might be thinking that 144 permutations of each aspect is a monumental task to tackle in one video. And it would certainly be a fool's errand to make some kind of list out of each of the permutations in turn.
Oh boy, here we go.
Part 6. Some kind of list of each of the permutations in turn, in which the author does the improbable and inadvisable. The following is a project undertaken by myself and a few kind reviewers, including Cal's Calzones, Owen Davis, and anyone who contributed on Twitter, Discord, or Google Docs. Every single interval between every single aspect is listed using textual examples from Homestuck. Breath. Perfect fifth. Life. Breath views life as familiar but distant. If breath lives in the now, then life is the now, no matter how fleeting. John and Jane have a great deal of overlap but fail to have meaningful discussions with each other. Major second. Light. Breath views light as idealistic and admirable. Light measures meaning, and nothing delights the breath player more than imposing meaning on where they have blown from or are blowing to. John and Rose get along exceptionally well, and Tavros looks up to Vriska even after his betrayal. Major sixth. Time. Breath views time as stalwart and reliable, but mystifying, and occasionally frustrating. John does not always understand Dave, and John has an actively antagonistic relationship with Caliborn. John is also stymied by Aradia. Strong feelings, one way or the other. Major third. Heart. Breath views heart as cagey and aloof. Breath goes with the flow, and heart is concerned with whims. Still, where do Breath's whims come from but heart? Major seventh. Rage. Breath views rage as amorous but strange. Breath often utilizes strong emotions and is in touch with rage, though it does not always enjoy it. Tavros and Gamzee are not close but have a background attraction that seems to play itself out repeatedly. Tritone. Blood. Breath views blood as delightful and lovely in its weirdness. The bonds that connect people are what breath and blood have in common. John has a deep affection for Karkat, even though Karkat's antagonism. And Tavros, much like the other trolls, sees Karkat as a confidant. Minor second. Doom. Breath views Doom as inconsequential and strange. Why worry about the inevitable? Live in the now! John doesn't interact with Solix, nor does Tavros, even though Solix and Tavros share game partners with mutual friends. Minor sixth. Void. Breath views Void as comfortable and attractive. Void and Breath share an absurdist, don't worry about it mentality that instantly entangles them. John immediately works together with Roxy, developing feelings for her. Minor third. Space. Breath views space as stalwart and safe. The breeze carries and space is its destination. John gets along closely with Jade, and Tavros seems to get along with Kanaya, even though they shared a paramour. A stable affection, born of equal inner peace. As with Tavros and Jade, though, this is not always a two-way street. Minor 7. Mind. Breath views mind as irritating and superfluous. Again, Breath players don't know themselves well and go with the flow, antithetical to mind players. John is actively killed by Terezi, and John later requires Terezi's help to solve a complicated problem. Tavros and Terezi are also at odds, though they are not antagonistic. Mind appears to see into Breath's blind spot. Wary companions. Perfect fourth. Hope. Breath views hope as weird and off-putting. What do you make of someone who tries to put the world in a box? If whatever will be, why bother hoping about anything? John and Jake, while familial, don't speak much, and when they do, they seem off-put by each other, though they do share many similarities. Unison. Breath. Breath views Breath as confusing and flighty. Breath players don't understand what's going on in their own heads. Tavros and John don't get along, and when John meets his time clones, he seems baffled by them. Trying to understand the motion of the universe is pointless. Life. Perfect fifth, light. Life views light as annoying and pointless. Knowledge and reason are silly. Anything worth knowing is self-evident. See Mina getting bored by Arania constantly. Minor second, time. Life views time as lovely but cruel. Time makes things grow stronger. Time is the great nurturer, the cycle giver. It is also the great taker away. Aradia and Fevery get along, but the Condus hates Lord English, her master. Damara and Mina are at each other's throats and seem to be wrapped in mutual despisal. Time and life are fundamentally of a different stripe. Major sixth, heart. Life views heart as in the way. Life has to make tough calls. Life is in charge. Life doesn't need a bunch of emotions cluttering everything up. Still, heart is the reason to be doing anything. Dirk and Jane have a complex, distant relationship. Major third, rage. Life views rage as useful. Zealotry is quite useful indeed. The Condus put the GHB in charge of the land, after all. Major seventh, blood. Life views blood as cute. Life sees blood as its lesser form, something that doesn't bear considering in life's order. The Condus ignores the sufferer. Fevery doesn't seem to take Karkat seriously. Mina also seems to have a little crush on Karkat. Tritone, doom. Life views doom as romantic. Doom is death. Doom is the meaning giver. Death is the reason life means anything. Fevery and Solix are romantically involved. Minor second, void. Life views void as incomprehensible. What the hell is going on in Void's head? Does Void even care? Ugh. Void completely stymies life, and that annoys them. Jane and Roxy are good friends, but Jane constantly belittles her out of insecurity. Minor six, space. Life views space as its complement, the self-recognized in the other, in a good way. Life and space are at their best and worst together. See Crocker tier Jane and Duck tier Jade. Minor third, mind. Life views mind as reason. Though cruel, the most useful tool in life's arsenal. Notice the mind players are always working in service to the life player, the Condus. Minor seventh, hope. Life views hope as cloying and clingy. Just stop with the hope shit. Life sucks sometimes, deal with it. God. Fevery and Eridan, Jake and Jane. Perfect fourth, breath. Life views breath as baffling but idealistic. Breath is the freedom life craves but never seems to get. Life is bound by too much. John and Jane are mirrors in this way. Unison, life. Life views life as hot shit. Life loves looking in the mirror. Light is on top of the fucking world. Mina admires the Condess, who admires herself, though this admiration turns into distaste sometimes. Still, Jane experiences a lot of self-hate from people belittling her, showing the weakness of this vain self-esteem. Light. Perfect fifth, time. Light views time as exasperating but necessary. A bureaucratic formality in the way of the designs. An irritant, cruel. Rose and Dave bicker, but Aradia and Vriska truly go at it. Still, one can't be without the other. Major second, heart. Light views heart as vexing. Heart and its little feelings. Light resents heart for the feelings that secretly rule light like a master. Major sixth, rage. Light views rage as humorous. Rage doesn't understand shit. A blind idealist. Light has no time for rage. Though again, light resents that which secretly rules it. Major third, blood. Light views blood as amusing and fickle. Blood to light is cute. Bonds are made to be broken. What matters is prestige and knowledge. Mindfang doesn't have much thought to spare the sufferer, and Vriska doesn't have much time to spare for Karkat. Major seventh, doom. Light views doom as trivial. Doom is a formality. Light is concerned with only what comes before. It knows we're all doomed, but not yet. Tritone, Void. Light views Void as whimsical and convivial. In a way, Void is the puzzle Light tries to solve. Void is Sisyphus's boulder, and as we know, we simply must imagine him smiling. Vriska and Equius get along, or at least Vriska is attracted to her neighbor, as do most Circuits and Zahaks. Rose and Roxy also get along. If we accept Mom Lalonde as a Void player, like Roxy, we can also interpret Rose's complete disconnect from her mother to reinforce this. Minor second, space. Light views space as beloved, but esoteric. Space is fine, but space is fucking weird. Space eats bugs, Light is pretty sure. Rose and Jade don't speak much, but Kanaya and Vriska get into it. Vriska still doesn't know what the hell is happening. There's also the legendary couple, Rose and Kanaya, who get along, but only through elaborate rituals. Minor 6, Mind. Light views Mind as alluring and dangerous. It's hard not to get pulled along with Mind. Mind and Light are locked in battle. Circuits versus Pyropes. Rose and Terezi briefly chat on Lolar and Act 6, and seem to be on the same level and exist vulnerably together. Minor 3rd, Hope. Light views Hope as childish but practical. Light is incapable of seeing Hope as its equal. It thinks Hope basically sucks, even though Hope is a major factor in Light's fortune. Vriska dismisses Jake and Eridan. Arania uses Jake as a main pawn in her game-over plan. Minor 7th, Breath. Light views Breath as quixotic and whimsical. Light is skeptical of Breath's actual abilities, but their attitude is infectious. Light can't help but love Breath. Rose and John, Vriska and Tavros, Vriska and John. The through line is Light's intense belief in Breath. Rose is the one who calls John their leader, after all. Perfect 4th, Life. Light views life as bizarre but aspirational. Light looks up to life. Life is so cool. Light wants to be just like life one day, but they can't. See Mina and Urania. Unison, Light. Light views Light as fundamentally smug. Light's ideal self cannot bear a mirror. The idea of Light is all that it can handle. For instance, Rose and Jasperose, Vriska and parenthesis Vriska. However, this smugness can turn into adoration, like in the case with Vriska and Mindfang.
I'm sorry, some of these interactions make so much more sense through the Circle of Fifths model. Life is music, music is life. Yes, we know. Shush. But, yeah. We're almost a fourth of the way through his detailed breakdown of the different interactions. And a lot of this explains a lot of what's going on in our head, too. And that is why the majority of me voted for this. I agree, but I didn't vote for it. I'm going to suffer. And break out laughing again. So don't mind me, I'm gonna mute again.
Time. Perfect 5th, Heart. Time views Heart as mysterious and fickle, an unreadable mask that fails to replicate. Time cannot comprehend the machinations of a fickle heart, as they do not beat in step. Dave and Dirk have a complex relationship where neither brother seems to comprehend the other. Major 2nd, Rage. Time views rage as creepy and surreal. Time does not have the language to process emotion, and Rage's emotion unbound. Dave's tries to connect to Gamzee, but utterly fails and sets off Gamzee into a monstrous rage. Major 6, Blood. Time views blood as inscrutable yet compelling, the bonds that bind and weather time's inevitable decay and decline. Dave and Karkat are antagonistic to one another, but Dave sees this antagonism as amusement. Major 3rd, Doom. Time views doom as inevitable end, the ending that gives life meaning. Aradia and Salix are close, and Salix and Dave share motifs. There is a great deal of overlap here, though their optimism is different in degree. Major 7 Void. Time views void as strange and alien. What is the nature of nothingness to they who measure the somethingness? Aradia is disgusted by Equius and Dave in spite of blood relation, seems to have little to say about Roxy. Tritone Space. Time views space as unpredictable and weird. This can manifest in close friendship like with Dave and Jade, or as the bitter hatred like with Calliope and Caliborn. In either case, there exists a curiosity and attraction, for better or worse. Minor 2nd Mind. Time views mind similarly to heart, mysterious and fickle, but more regimented and incomprehensible. The filtering of the inner world with the material world. Dave and Terezi both share a sense of humor and are able to coordinate complicated plans together. Minor 6th Hope. Time views hope in a similar regard to light. Why measure what's inevitable? Why put bets on the immutable? Dave does not interact with Jake, and Aradia does not interact with Eridan in any significant capacity. Minor 3rd Breath. Time views breath as free but indecisive, an ideal to strive for, a breeze you carry onward. Aradia and Tavros, as well as Dave and John, are bosom buddies, friends to the end, unshakably intertwined. Minor 7 Life. Time views life as fascinating but alienating. Intrigued by the motion of life and its cycles, it idealizes death in a cosmic dance. Dave views Jane at a distance but is obviously attracted to her. Aradia and Pfeffery share a paramour in common. Damara and Mina have a clash that seems at least somewhat based in class-based rivalry. Time and life are expressions of the same forces from different levels of resource. Perfect 4th Light. Time views light as baffling and pointless. Why measure the movement of the spheres if they simply are? What will come to pass will come in time. Aradia feels hatred towards Vriska, who tries to bring about pointless idealism. Dave and Rose, while connected, rarely are talking about the same thing. Unison Time. Time views time as the primary force of the universe. Without it, there would be no motion, no ability to progress, no turning of the page, no whisper on the breeze. Time is the reliable clockwork that undergirds the world. Dave and Aradia both get along with their time clones and experience a mutual understanding of each other intuitively. Heart. Perfect 5th Rage. Heart views rage as pleasant and sympathetic. Rage and heart work in harmony. They're both expressions of the ego's emotions. Mulin and Kurlos are the closest of friends, though sometimes that is not to Mulin's advantage. Major 2nd Blood. Heart views blood as attractive and nurturing. Heart loves blood as nourishment. The disciple falls for the sufferer as Nepeta falls for Karkat. It is not always destined for success or even reciprocity, but it is destined for fulfillment. Major 6th Doom. Heart views doom as blank. Doom is inevitable, and the inevitable is of no interest. Heart deals in uncertainty and conviction, not certainty and inevitability. Dirk nor Nepeta have any significant bond with Doombound. Major 3rd Void. Heart views void as incomplete and strange, but inescapably alluring. Void is the great creeping nihilism that Heart is running from. Void is proof positive that Heart's sense of self is fragile and transient. Heart, the ego, cannot face its own destruction. Roxy and Dirk nominally get along, but Dirk appears to have no idea how to factor Roxy into his plans, or have any insight into her mental state. Equius and Nepeta are famously moirails. When Equius and Hal combine, they get along, but seem to be at odds. It's a harmonious imbalance. Major 7 Space. Heart views space as neutral and overarching. Space is of little emotional importance to a Heart player. They have no notion of the ocean they swim in. Dirk views Jade as dangerous, but ultimately able to be circumvented. Also Callie versus Dirk in the epilogues. Tritone, Mind. Heart views mind as idealistic and mysterious. The mind is the layer that Heart cannot penetrate. It is a total mystery to them. They cannot step out from behind their own perspective. When Brain Ghost Dirk appears before Terezi, Dirk quickly dismisses her attempts to find out about him. He is uninterested and find her obtrusive. Minor second, hope. Hart views hope as achingly idealistic but incomprehensible. Hope is the light at the end of the tunnel for Hart. Dirk is obsessed with Jake during their relationship to the point of alienating Jake. Minor sixth, breath. Hart views breath as irritating and pointless. Going with the flow produces nothing of value. Carpe diem. Dirk is dismissive of John in every case he meets him. Minor third, life. Hart views life as a force to be corralled. Life is a big fucking mess, and Hart believes it has the mop. Hart, though fickle, is ready to face life's challenges and process the feelings. Dirk, more than anyone, meets Jane on her level, and appears to be the only one able to get through her thick fucking skull. Minor seventh, light. Hart views light as a utilitarian. Light, to the heartbound, is a tool. Luck does not have a force to be harnessed, but a law of nature to be studied. It is a caged animal that can provide great insight into itself. Dirk views Rose as a tool and a rival. Perfect fourth, time. Hart views time as routine and droll. Time acts upon Hart, but Hart does not know how to act upon time in return. Indecision only becomes a vice with time spent deciding. Dirk and Bro have no idea how to connect with either version of Dave, but understand they are connected. There's also Devepida. Unison, Hart. Hart views Hart as the enemy, the dog growling at his reflection, the self recognizing the self in the other. Hart's relationship to their inevitably fractured selves is a stultifying misery. They fundamentally despise themselves and are unable to self-construct like mind or breath. Agonizing existence. Dirk and Hal are sources of mental anguish, more than any other self-same pair.
Rage. Perfect fifth. Blood. Rage views blood as stalwart and potent. Purple bloods understand the importance of red bloods. Gamzee and Karkat, the grand high blood of the sufferer. They recognize this innate power. Major second, Doom. Rage views Doom as stultifying. Doom is what the Rage player most primarily rages against. Major sixth, Void. Rage views Void as enervating. There is nothing that removes the wind from Rage's sails like ambiguity. Uncertainty and doubt are poisons. Equius is the only person Gamzee never bests and gets under Gamzee's skin. Major third, space. Rage views space as cruel and tragic. Space is the source of rage and anger. It is where the buck stops. Every injustice can be traced to resources and real space. Kanaya saws Gamzee in half. Major 7, mind. Rage views mind as alluring and manipulable. Rage uses mind like a tool, shaping and making them malleable, then discarding them. A single mind is worth little. Gamzee and Terezi's relationship is a one-sided affair, with Gamzee taking advantage. Tritone, hope. Rage views hope as a farce. A joke is the man who hopes hope is in the action. The Grand High Blood kills Dual Scar without a shred of mercy. Minor second, breath. Rage views breath as alluring and idealistic. Breath's effortless freedom is addictive to the rage-bound. Gamzee has a crush on Davros, based on very few interactions. Minor sixth, life. Rage views life as a useful resource. In Rage's conquest, life is a force of great power, but only when put to use. Her imperious condescension in the Grand High Blood. Minor third, light. Rage views light as heretical. Predict the future, gain knowledge, gamble on uncertain luck, pointless endeavors in a subjective reality. Minor seventh, time. Rage views time as overarching and awe-inspiring, but cruel. Time is the great healer. Time changes things. Rage wants to change things. Gamzee serves Lord English, but is enraged by Dave. Kurlos too serves Lord English. Rage and time are intertwined. Perfect fourth, heart. Rage views heart as disposable and fickle. Why follow one's heart when they can follow a maddened crowd or worship an esoteric god? The heart betrays. Gamzee kills Nepeta with a smile on his face. Kurlos is Mulin's lover, but his designs far eclipse his affection. Rage struggles with committing to people over ideas. Unison, rage. Rage views rage as tragic. Woe is he who gives his life to serve the higher purpose. Substance abuse, neglect, and self-loathing plagued the rage-bound. Gamzee cares little for his ancestor, and after his ultimate breakdown cannot face himself.
Blood. Perfect fifth, doom. Blood views doom as certain and regrettable. As said, blood pushes against entropy and against doom, but it does not hate doom. Karkat and Solix are close, but prone to bickering. Major second, void. Blood views void as creepy and weird. Void does not constitute anything worth discussing. It is not material reality by definition. Karkat and Equius don't talk much, but when they do, there is a palpable disconnect. Major sixth, space. Blood views space as frustrating but alluring. Space, in its vastness, creates the material conditions blood is bound to. Space is immovable and real. Karkat puts Jade and Kanaya on a pedestal in some sense, deferring to them. The Dolorosa cares to the signless, for he would not exist without her. Major third, mind. Blood views mind as insipid but useful. Mind's constant prattling are like nails on a chalkboard to blood, but mind's theories and ideas prove inevitably useful. Karkat has a deep trust of Terezi, but he often argues with her, usually to his own embarrassment. Major seventh, hope. Blood views hope much like light, insipid realism. Though Blood seems to think it can bring hope back to reality, Karkat acts as the voice of reason for Aridin and his girl troubles. Both Blood and hope can be kind of weenies. Tritone, breath. Blood views breath as frustrating and quixotic. Breath spends its time detached and free when Blood attempts to be tied down. Karkat is frustrated by John's carefree attitude, but the duo work towards the same goals. Theirs is a difference only in philosophy, not of means or ends. Minor second, life. Blood views life as a curse. Life is a great stage upon which is played the theater of cruelty. Life is pain and suffering. Blood players don't hate being alive, but they do hate life. The sufferer and the Condess are the main conflict of the story of the Dancestors. Minor sixth, light. Blood views light as annoying and unnecessary. Needless optimism has no place among Blood's pragmatism. There is no way to bring the Lightbound back to Earth, so Blood doesn't bother. Karkat concedes authority to Vriska during the late stages of the comic and does not bother with her. Minor third, time. Blood views time as inextricable and cruel. Blood trades in bonds and responsibility. It attempts to stem the tide of entropy and cannot stand its crushing weight. Karkat is constantly enraged by Dave, though he is fixated upon him. Minor seventh, heart. Blood views heart as alien yet comforting. Literally speaking, the heart is the vessel for the blood. The blood serves the heart. The blood, then, can never know its container. Karkat seems to understand Nepeta has a crush on him, but keeps her at arm's length. The sufferer and the disciple engage in a love that transcends the quadrants. The porcupine's dilemma. Perfect fourth, rage. Blood views rage as sympathetic and misguided. Rage is Blood's instincts in a pure form, emotion distilled into wild acts. Karkat views Gamzee as a bro, but a bro in need of being pacified. This relationship is unstable. Unison, blood. Blood views blood as enraging and stultifying. Like breath, blood does not know itself, but unlike breath, it is not for lack of trying. Blood players undergo incessant and maddening introspection to the point that the drama boils over from inside themselves to outside. Karkat argues with his time clones. Cankry infuriates anyone who bothers to listen, and the sufferer's convictions earn him death. Blood uniquely hates itself in fractal. Doom. Doom views void as strange but inevitable. Void is the end result of doom. If time becomes doom, then doom becomes void. Solix and Equius, in spite of several mutual friends, do not speak significantly. They accept their place. Major second, space. Doom views space as vapid and pointless. Space is merely the arena in which doom will be enacted. If a tree falls in the forest, and there is no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Doom and space do not have significant overlaps. Kanaya hassles Solix in their first ever Pesterlog. Major sixth, mind. Doom views mind as meddlesome and irritating. Why bother deciding course if the end is charted? If it isn't broken, don't fix it. Solix and Terezi don't get along well and are embroiled as bystanders in a cycle of vengeance. When they do talk, it's all business. Major third, hope. Doom views hope as its most beautiful enemy. Hope is not for the doom-bound. Why hope for anything when the only ending is death? Inevitability invalidates hope. Solix and Eridan despise each other. Cronus and Machuna are incapable of constructive discussion. They are incompatible. Though tenuous, Aerosol, who is equal parts doom and hope, hates himself and in turn hate Jake. Major seventh, breath. Doom views breath as pointless and distant. Why worry about where life may take you when we all know where it ends? There are no significant relationships between doom-bound and breath-bound. Tritone, life. Doom views life as idealistic, yet cruel. Life is the thing that ends when Doom's inevitability comes to pass. As such, life is the thing Doom strives to derive meaning from. This can be idealistic. Solix and Pfeffery are confidants and friends. This can be cruel. The psionic is the slave battery to the Condis. Doom is of utility to life, for better or worse. Minor second, light. Doom views light similarly to mind, meddlesome and dangerous. There is no fortune in a zero-sum game. Solix regards Vriska with mocking hostility. He doesn't care. Minor six, time. Doom views time as ever-present and progressing. Time is the force moving the world towards its inevitability, the servant to Doom. Solix and Aradia are close friends and implied lovers, and are never shown engaging in significant arguments. Minor third, heart. Doom views heart as vital and important. If Doom seeks meaning through endings, heart creates these meanings to be ended. The psionic and the disciple were both followers of a doomed cult to the sufferer. Minor seventh, rage. Doom views rage as unfettered and chaotic. Chaos is value neutral to the doom-bound. Let rage wild out, who cares? Perfect fourth, blood. Doom views blood as mystifying and frustrating, but necessary. Blood is the bond that gives existence meaning, though blood refuses to acknowledge inevitability. Karkat and Solix are bros, but they're always bickering. Unison, Doom. Doom views Doom as completely singular. Endings cause meanings. Nihilism is not an existential threat to the Doombound. While there are no conversations from Doombound to Doombound, all Doombound seem to have a strong sense of identity and purpose. Void. Perfect fifth, space. Void views space as... oh wow. The stars in the night sky. Have you ever noticed how beautiful they are? So distant but beautiful. Roxy is inspired by Callie. So much mystery. Major second, mind. Void views mind as there's a lot going on there. Just a lot of moving parts. Let me put it this way. Why play chess when you can play checkers? Why play checkers when you can play tic-tac-toe? Rules don't matter as much as you think they can be, but they can be fun. Rules aren't supposed to be fun, but that's all they can be. Major sixth, hope. Void views hope as... this guy has fucking problems, dude. I'm serious. This guy is weird. I don't know what his problem even is. Like, I get it. I do. He wants good stuff, don't we all? But he's so obsessed with it. Like, you know? Roxy and Jake are occasional half-baked rivals, but they get along. Major third, Breath. Void views Breath as, well, que sera, sera. Breath understands Void. They get along. It's the same thing with different inertia. Roxy likes John right away. Easygoing. Major seventh, Life. Void views life as, basically, you need to stop putting shit in boxes. Things shouldn't be all set up and regimented. It doesn't matter. No matter how you arrange it, it's the same stuff and will be forever. Meaningful change is an illusion. Why can't you see that? Roxy and Jane try to reconnect, but end up talking about different things. There's also Roxy and Fafetta. Tritone, Light. Void views light as, kind of bright. Turn that down. We don't need all that light. Light is only good for hurting your eyes, but I guess it's fun to chat about philosophy, you know? Rose and Roxy get along just fine. They're sisters, so are Void and Light. Some Light players, though, like Roxy and Arania, Minor second, Time. Void views time as it's what keeps going. Gotta have time, you know? Equus views Aradia as necessary and compelling, enough to make her a robot body. Time is stuff moving around. Minor sixth, Heart. Void views Heart as, oh God, this guy. I love this guy, but holy shit, man, this is... no, they've got all their shit all mixed up. Equius loves Nepeta, but doesn't understand her. Roxy loves Dirk, but doesn't understand him. They need to get their poop in a group, you know? There is Fefeta Sprite. Dear sweet Fefeta. Minor third, Rage. Void views Rage as... oh, this guy. Funny guy. Oh. You better kill me in one shot, Rage. Minor seventh, Blood. Void views Blood as... maybe. Maybe that blood stuff. Maybe not. Is it really gonna matter in the end? It might. It might not. It mattering doesn't matter. You know? Perfect fourth, Doom. Void views Doom as... well, yeah, Doom. You know? Obviously, Doom. Doom is there. Doom is the coleslaw at the cookout, you know? It's there. Just accept it. It's whatever. Unison. Void. Void views Void as... well, it's there. It's there not being there. Its non-existence is proof positive. It's the paradox that undergirds the universe, man. Void is because it isn't. It's the paradox you meet and say, okay, sure, and move the fuck on. Void knows what it is and what it isn't, and it's everything and nothing and vague and defined, and it's void. You know when you see it. You know when you don't see it. Space. Perfect fifth, Mind. Space View's mind is surreal and fascinating, like a bug in a jar. Mind's facade cannot pierce Space's observant gaze. When Porum and Latula speak, Porum insists Latula drop her rad girl affect. Major second, Hope. Space View's hope is distant but idealistic. Space is materialistic but fundamentally optimistic, so hope has a distant appeal. The glass is half full. Jake and Jane correspond, but only from a great distance. Same with Jake and Grandma. Kanaya doesn't appreciate Eridan's flirtations, but does humor him. Major 6, Breath. Space View's Breath is idealistic and beloved. Space and Breath share a go-with-the-flow vibe, but Space seems to be more rooted in the pragmatic. Jade and John are friends. Major 3rd, Life. Space View's life is necessary cohorts. Life and Space have many spheres in common, such as fertility and the continuation of species. They are dispassionate friends. Jane and Jade work together in the service of a greater life player, the Condis. Major 7th, Light. Space View's light is cerebral and confusing, but ultimately beautiful. Predicting the future must not seem necessary to someone who deals in slow progress. Rose and Jade get along, but seldom chat. Kanaya drops affection for Vriska when she doesn't reciprocate. Then again, there's Rose and Kanaya who enter a relationship. Even so, Kanaya seems always to be trailing behind Rose's shenanigans. Tritone, Time. Space View's time is whimsical and lovely, however cruel. Time is the force acting upon space. It is the partner in the cosmic dance. It's also the ultimate entropic destructive force. Jade and Dave are close friends who work together intimately, whereas Calliope and Caliborn are sworn bitter rivals of an irredeemable species. Porum seems to be the only person who cares about Damara of their group, even if it's unclear how Damara feels about this. Minor second, Heart. Space views Heart as overwrought. For space, who is defined by its material conditions, it can't understand the pining nature of Heart. Minor sixth, Rage. Space views rage as fucking insufferable. As a repressive force, space doesn't like rage or the way it acts out. Kanaya kicks Gamzee off a building and saws him in half one time. They don't get along. Minor third, Blood. Space views blood as frustrating but necessary. Space tries to impose restrictions on blood and corral blood into being fucking reasonable for once. Jade can only stand Karkat when Karkat is being normal. This is similar to Kanaya and Karkat, as well as the Dolorosa and the Sufferer. They have a nurturing instinct. Minor 7, Doom. Space views Doom as tragic, but useful. Space's works and progress are inevitably undone by Doom, but Doom is a viable path forward. The volcano's eruption gives way to new vegetation. Kanaya and Solix don't speak frequently, but when they do, Kanaya needs something. Perfect fourth, Void. Space views Void as beautiful, but indecipherable. Space, seeing its opposite, pauses to contemplate the space within itself. Is Void just more space? Is Void something else? Space gets creeped out and thinks about something else. Unison. Space. Space views space as complicated. It's hard for space to meet space on its own terms. Jade doesn't understand her time-clone dream self. Kanaya and Jade eventually get along, but only after they're stymied by each other. Kanaya and Porum seem to be the only example of a positive space-space relation, mostly due to the fact that Porum has something to teach, namely Kanaya's vampire powers. A great wariness plagues the introspecting space player. Mind. Perfect fifth, Hope. Mind views hope as aspirational but self-aggrandizing. Hope is a delusional force, and Mindbound despise this, but Mind can see Hope's great capacity for change. Major second, Breath. Mind views breath as impractical and irritating. Breath is a freedom from constraint that Mind does not consider useful. Terezi and John don't get along, to the point of her killing him. Terezi doesn't have many words for Tavros. Major 6, Life. Mind views life as overarching and inert. Mind players are not concerned with changing systems, only analyzing them. Life is the construction of systems, which is uninteresting to the Mindbound. Major 3rd, Light. Mind views light as poisonous. Light's luck and wild chance and appetite for knowledge give the meticulous Mind player a run for their money. All Mind and Light players are at odds. Major 7th, Time. Mind views time as useful and straightforward, yet esoteric. Time is the vector by which the mind acts, but its intricacies are lost upon Mind. Terezi and Dave get along well, and Aradia and Terezi were close, but they ended up being pawns in a sick game. Tritone, Heart. Mind views heart as alien and strange. Heart is inscrutable to the mind. Emotion is inscrutable to reason. Even so, it sure is interesting. When Dirk appears as a brain ghost, Terezi begins to sniff him intrusively. Minor second, Rage. Mind views rage as addictive and destructive. Mind players, in their staunch convictions, are drawn to other staunch convictions, but rage players most frequently do not meet Mindbound on their terms. See Terezi and Gamzee. Minor 6, Blood. Mind views blood as fickle and funny. Mindbound feel disconnected from emotions that blood deals so heavily in, but they still share common ground. Karkat and Terezi are antagonistic but close. Minor 3rd, Doom. Mind views Doom as intriguing but depressing. The mind is a playground, which will be gone when Doom has its way. Terezi and Solix don't speak much, and when they do, it is utilitarian. Latula and Machuna are close, but they aren't speaking the same language. Minor 7th, Void. Mind views Void as funny and essential. Vagary and introspection are the playground of the Mindbound. Perfect 4th, Space. Mindview's space is ordinary, yet complex. A paradox. The world we live in is immutable, but full of multifaceted geometries. Unison, mind. Mindview's mind is rational and stalwart. Mind players don't speak to themselves often, but they do have an overwhelming self-confidence. When that self-confidence is shattered, they shatter with it, like Terezi on the meteor. They are their own North Star. Hope. Perfect fifth. Breath. Hope views breath as an idealistic mirror. Breath is freedom, what hope craves. Breath achieves freedom, hope strives. Recognition of the self in the other. Jake and John don't speak much, but they resemble each other quite a lot. Major second, life. Hope views life as confusing and attractive. Life is cool and sometimes sucks, and Hope doesn't really understand how to get different results from life. Jake and Jane, Aridin and Pfeffery. Major sixth, light. Hope views light as idyllic and fascinating, but intimidating. They unlock potential, but not in the way Hope is used to. Light takes some of the fun out of the game of life. Arania and Jake's conversations end up one-sided and cringeworthy, and not on Hope's side. Major third, time. Hope views time as base and crass. For the idealist, time is a resource in short supply. Hope needs more, and there never is. Major seventh, heart. Hope views heart as cloying, but attractive. Hope isn't always satisfied with how it idealizes love versus how much it works out for them. Dirk and Jake, for instance. Also, Aridin pines for romance, which is Nepeta's sphere of expertise. Tritone, rage. Hope views rage as animalistic and crass. Rage takes what Hope believes and puts the rubber to the road. But rage has no concern over rightness and wrongness like Hope does. Minor second, blood. Hope views blood as stalwart and basal. Blood is the only one to buy into Hope's bullshit. Karkat is the only person sympathetic to Aridin, even a little, and Aridin immediately opens up to him. Minor six, doom. Hope views doom as antithesis. The great delusion of Hope is doom. How could it accept the other? Minor third, void. Hope views void as mysterious and wonderful. Hope's fascination is with possibility, and void's vague nature lets Hope run wild. Jake and Roxy are the only alpha kids who have no significant quarrel with each other. Minor seven, space. Hope views space as whimsical and fascinating. Space hides so many opportunities which are the currency of Hope players. Jade and Jake exchange letters, and Jake seems excited to meet her. When Aridin speaks to Kanaya, though, it is only to flirt with her and gain more knowledge about his crush Vriska. Hope's relationship seems a little one-sided. Perfect fourth, mind. Hope views mind as incomprehensible. Hope players are single-minded. They have very little patience for nuance. My way or the highway. Unison, hope. Hope views hope as... doesn't really view itself at all. The delusion of hope requires the Hope player to live off their own little world. There's no room for another guy up there. Aerosol, who is equal parts hope and doom, dislikes Jake, but refuses to engage with him, leading Jake to having a delusional impression of their non-friendship. Part 7. DC Alcoda, in which the bitch finally finishes up. Though this list was exhaustive, we made it. The door is now open. Analysis is ready to be made. New characters are waiting to be crafted. New stories are aching to be told. Due to the time constraints of this particular video, I was unable to explore more concepts like class or deeper concept and vibes, such as the notion of chords and cadence. In the future, there will be more material on the topic, and if you're lucky enough to be in the future, you will be able to view these topics right now. This video began with a thorough explanation of the current scholarship surrounding aspects, and by the end I have posited my own, more comprehensive theory, but ultimately this material is not for the benefit of we, the philosophers and scholars, but you, the viewers, the creators, the writers, the story makers, for you to be inspired to either look inward and view something you love from a different perspective, or to look outward and be inspired to create fresh. I strive to be your muse. This material must have a purpose. If you'd like to spread the word or support me in my further endeavors, please do so at patreon.com. My blog is hosted for free on Patreon, so there's plenty of free stuff available outside of paid benefits. Once again, I hope everyone has a wonderful SockCon. I know that SockCon has been wonderful in recent years. Make sure to check out the music album. Someone actually had a biology panel, like following up my biology panel from a couple years ago. That was kind of cool to see. So I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Happy SockCon, and if you're in the future past SockCon, well, SockCon D's nuts. See you later.
As I said before, go follow Funk McLovin if you want more Homestuck content. He does a great job of doing philosophy. We are going to do another one of his videos, but before we continue, it is time we finally delve into the aspects. Your aspect is one of 3 qualities which uniquely determine your true sign, along with your sign class and lunar sway. Your aspect indicates that you are bound to one of 12 cosmic properties: breath, blood, life, doom, light, void, time, space, heart, mind, rage, or hope. Each aspect is paired with another, which are in opposition to each other, as seen in the wheel below. To find out your true sign, which includes discovering your aspect, take the test now. We will take the test later, but we will go through each of the aspects in turn before we continue with his addendum to that main video, and then on to class, because class is a little bit more complicated, but also more straightforward. Time. Those bound to the aspect of time are fighters. Full stop. Their lives are often marked by struggle, not so much because fate has it in for them, but because they are fundamentally incapable of just accepting things as they come. They value action over passive acceptance, even if that may not be the wisest or safest choice. Don't try to tell a time-bound to sit still and look pretty. They are very goal-focused and tend to value the destination over the journey, and you won't find them making that journey in any traditional sort of way. To quote cheesy posters found on many a guidance counselor's wall, impossible is just a word. If you need a miracle, they are who you call. At their best, the time-bound are empathetic and relentless problem solvers, and at their worst, they are ruthless, defensive, and impulsive. Cough. Dave. Space. Those bound to the aspect of space are, as the name suggests, concerned with the big picture. They are patient masters of the art of wait and see, and are inclined to take things as they come. That isn't to say that they're pushovers, or willing to let injustice lie. They just choose their battles wisely, understanding that sometimes you have to let something burn to the ground in order to build it back better and stronger than before. To this effect, they tend to be innovators, concerned with the creation and redemption. Catch them recycling the old to make the new, the fresh, and the beautiful. For the space-bound, the journey is as, if not more, important than the destination. How they do something is as important as what they do. At their best, they are steady, impartial, and creative. At their worst, they can be detached, apathetic, and vague. Heart. Those bound to the aspect of heart are very concerned with their favorite subject, themselves. It wouldn't be a stretch to call them self-obsessed, but not necessarily in a negative way. They simply want to understand the one thing we are all stuck with for our entire lives, i.e., our own minds. Forging an identity is extremely important to the heartbound, and every decision and action goes toward building a coherent narrative of their own story. That isn't to say heartbound don't care deeply for their friends and allies, they just have a tendency to assume that everyone is as concerned with identity as they are. They are excellent at putting on and taking off masks as the situation calls for them. At their best, they are competent, imaginative, and steady. At their worst, they can be overbearing, inflexible, and cold. Mind. Those bound to the aspect of mind are, you guessed it, the universe's great thinkers. But don't for a second think that means they have all the answers. They are very concerned with remaining rational, and they have such a firm hold on the constant conjunction of their thinking that it's easy for them to see the multitudes of choices laid out before them, which often leaves them frozen and unable to act. That said, when a mind-bound finally launches into action, they can execute a plan with unbelievable grace and precision. Their identity is fluid. It can change from day to day, from thought to thought, from interaction to interaction. Remaining logical is more important to them than building up a solid foundation of self. At their best, they are great innovators, architects, and creators. And at their worst, they can be nasty, inflexible, and indecisive. Hope. Those bound to the aspect of hope are driven first and foremost by their convictions. They do right for right's sake, and are quick to come to the aid of anyone they deem to be experiencing injustice. That said, their views of the world can be quite black and white, so what they see as the right thing may not always be the universally accepted view. They put great value in the power of the imagination, the ability to dream up a better and more beautiful future. If anyone could dream a better world into existence, it would be one of the hope-bound. They may sound all sunshine and rainbows, but they aren't adverse to a little destruction, especially if they think they can replace it with something better and more just. At their best, hope-bound are positive, caring, warm. At their worst, they can be narrow-minded and selfish. Rage. Those bound to the aspect of rage are bringers of chaos. They possess great contempt for lies or false ideas, including the stability that false ideas can impart. To them, the true is far more important than the good. They would tear down a system just to destabilize it, if, by their reckoning, it is built on a faulty premise. Often the rage-bound prefer anarchy to any of the alternate forms of civilization, which they believe to be riddled with lies and foolishness and obedient masses. They are bringers of confusion and doubt, and they can be frustratingly difficult to convince otherwise when they have attached themselves to an idea. If they sound dangerous, they are. The rage-bound tend to be the most volatile and unpredictable of the aspects. At their best, they are original, revolutionary, and fearless. At their worst, they are cruel, uncompromising, and vicious. And all this talk of chaos reminds me I forgot to put a quality in here. Insert one table column left. Yeah, you're going to hear about inverted classes at some point in one of the future videos before we actually get to taking this. Thankfully, both Carcat and Dave in our heads are knights through and through, both inverted and not. Okay. Let's fix that. There we go. Light. Those bound to the aspect of light are the universe's knowledge seekers. They are, above all, driven to learn and understand. They are great alchemists, able to take multiple sources of information and synthesize them into something useful. They are scholars and researchers, absolutely dedicated to knowledge for knowledge's sake. They are the ultimate students. And although that might conjure up the image of people sitting around peacefully waiting for knowledge to be brought to them, that couldn't be further from the truth. The light-bound will go after knowledge with a fierce intensity that others may find distasteful. They aren't overly concerned with laws or norms either. They often take rules as simple suggestions, instead searching for loopholes or workarounds. At their best, the light-bound are resourceful and driven, and at their worst, they can be fussy, pedantic, and insensitive. Void. Those bound to the aspect of void are the universe's secret keepers. The unknown doesn't scare them. Where others might see emptiness, they see potential. A blank page, an empty canvas. That's what the void-bound live for. They value mystery and the unexplained, and are not particularly bothered by not having all the answers. Where others might be compelled to go out and seek answers, the void-bound lean more towards casting doubt on what is already considered fully understood. They don't take much on faith, and would rather live in a state of confusion than believe something that might be untrue, or bow to intellectual authority. After all, in order for something new to be built, the old rotting foundation must often be raised. At their best, void-bound are wise, intuitive, and vibrant. At their worst, they can be dismissive, indecisive, and apathetic. Breath. Those bound to the aspect of breath are, above all, expansive. Flexible and driven, they leave an impact wherever they go, like the breeze itself. They are able to sweep others up, to carry along in their wake. But, also like the breeze, they can be difficult to catch hold of or tie down. Although breath-bound do make very good leaders, breath tends to be a very personal aspect. Often, heroism comes along as an offshoot of them pursuing their own personal stories. They lead by example, and will routinely be surprised that others look up to or feel inspired by them. They have a tendency to underestimate themselves, and not always out of poor self-esteem. They were just doing their own thing. At their best, breath-bound are motivated, adaptable, and forward-thinking, but at their worst, they can be volatile, avoidant, and gullible. Blood. Those bound to the aspect of blood draw their strength from bonds, from the trust and camaraderie that blooms among a group of people who all share a single vision. Bloodbound are absolutely leaders, but they inhabit more of an inspirational role than a commanding one. They are prophets rather than generals, giving others the strength and motivation to keep fighting. The bloodbound can dispense excellent advice even when their own lives and interpersonal relationships are disasters. They can be very do as I say, not as I do types. A bloodbound can often be found on a sinking ship, forcing an endeavor forward with sheer stubborn force of will. No matter how bad things go, a bloodbound can always count on friends and allies. At their best, they are charismatic, uplifting, and magnetic. At their worst, they can be sullen, unkind, and set in their ways. Life. Those bound to the aspect of life are the universe's healers. They are concerned with the betterment of themselves and those around them, as well as the onward march of positive progress. Deeply empathetic, they have an intuitive understanding of others' suffering, and the best way of righting those wrongs. If you're poisoned, chances are the lifebound has something for what ails you. This applies to both physical and mental suffering, though it might not be a cure you'll like. They also have the tendency to put others' needs before their own, which never ends well for anyone, because the lifebound can grow bitter if they feel their own self-care has had to be shunted aside. At their best, they are great listeners, caretakers, and nurturers. At their worst, the lifebound are passive-aggressive and pushy, and certain they know best. Doom. Those bound to the aspect of doom are fate's chosen sufferers. It may not sound like an overly pleasant aspect to be aligned with, but it does come along with great wisdom and empathy. The doom-bound understand that misery loves company, and they are ready and willing to provide said company. The doom-bound won't fix you. They aren't healers. They are commiserators, aware that sometimes the only thing you can do for a person is let them know that they are not alone in their suffering. They are not the advice friend. They are the friend you go to when you need to vent about a rough day at work. They are not necessarily noble martyrs. Either the doombound can become quite irate about their lot. At their best, they are wise, kind, and not judgmental. At their worst, bitter, resentful, and fatalistic. And that is all of the canon aspects. How does that play into this? Well, we'll get to that. But first, let's finish up learning about the other core components, the lunar sway, and classes, as well as the addendum to the aspect video.
Hello, everybody. This is Funk McLovin. On June, I want to say 20th, I released the aspect video, and this is a follow-up to the aspect video that I wanted to make because I'm releasing the class video on January 3rd, which is the same date as the SACON Winter Showcase. I want to do a couple follow-ups on the aspect system because there are some things I didn't cover. There have been some good comments from people, and I wanted to do some housekeeping so that you guys could have a little more information about aspects going into the class video. First of all, I want to talk about a couple of the video's shortcomings. First of all, I didn't go in depth with a definition for each aspect. I just detailed them as they relate to other aspects, and I kind of left out the actual definitions. I did this on purpose, but I realize in retrospect that that was not a very good way to do things. I think that I left out some information which caused some people to misunderstand some things in the comments, and we'll get into that soon. I didn't mention some contributors in the aspect sphere. The person I didn't mention was Argus, Arrghus.
Go ahead and follow them as well, by the way.
Who is a collaborator with Optimistic Duelist. I meant to, and I didn't. And I know that I don't owe Argus anything. I just feel bad that I didn't mention that name. I like Argus's work. And I want to be clear on two things. I got some pronouns wrong on some people that I talked about in the last video. First of all, Dewdrop and Ourobarista both go by they, them, and I refer to them both as he, him. And
Okay, I did not know that information, so go follow them. They are both amazing creators, and I will not screw that up again.
I apologize. You know, there's no hard feelings. I talked to both of them, so this is just my public apology. I apologize to both of you. And I want to be clear on some things that I said in the previous video about Dewdrop.
Yep, as I said, absolutely frustrating, but a valid interpretation, and also Dewdrop put a lot of effort into their work. So, continuing.
The tone of voice that I used when describing Dewdrop's work was hyperbolic and dismissive, and a lot of people got the notion that I did not like Dewdrop's work or did not like Dewdrop, including Dewdrop themselves, who I apologize to formally. What I wanted to do was to be hyperbolic in order to say two things. One, that I don't entirely agree with Dewdrop's work, and two, that I find Dewdrop's work in some ways exhaustive and thorough in a way that is impressive and kind of funny to me. Dewdrop has essentially written an entire document longer than the aspect video for basically no recognition. And there are a couple things I disagree with in Dewdrop's video on an intellectual level, but that does not mean that I should have been so dismissive and mean to them. So I apologize.
Again, their work is valid, but it is absolutely frustrating to read. Imagine, if you will, trying to read an academic document for a fan project. And that will give you an idea of how frustrating it is. Dewdrop, we love you. My friend, my acquaintance, who I only spoke to once years ago as Dave. But no. Your work is valuable, But for the purposes of the aspect theory that we are operating off of, for the purposes of this class-specting exercise, your concept of aspects does not fit by any stretch. Classes, though, your classwork for the class specs, the classes, you pretty much nailed it. So, we'll get to that. Moving on.
Guys, formally, to you, Dewdrop. I'm going to be talking about Dewdrop more in the class video, so you can look forward to that. Alrighty. This video is going to be about some comments that I got on the previous video on both Reddit and on YouTube. Now, the first one is from a post on Reddit that talks about... it posted my video and people just asked, what do you think of this? It was a discussion thread. And there were a lot of cool comments, so I wanted to talk about them. I'm not going to talk about everyone, but I'm going to talk about someone here. The first comment is by Miserable Following 77. It's on screen. And there's a couple things I want to highlight.
Okay, that is not a
Will and Homestuck to do
good faith comment.
Major chord. And this is clear as that. Chord, it sounds. This is a right up sign of to. It's a bit every day. I'm doing it. X_51. How mine.
This one appears to be in good faith. So let's
back music to the point. Astral Drim says, I totally dig using music to define the relation between aspect, considering the concept of the fray motif for combined attacks, but I would nitpick since the characters and class specs haven't been created in a single go. It's a bit hard to think the writers of Homestuck had plans to set relations in this precise between every characters. Yes, I don't think Hussey set it up this way. I'm just doing analysis. This is kind of a death of the author analysis. I don't think Hussey intended this. I don't think he had this idea. I'm not decoding this idea from anything. I'm coming up with this idea freshly. I'm developing it. And that's the point. I don't, this comment, I respect it. I get it. But this is not what I'm trying to do. Next, I want to talk about some responses I got on YouTube about one that was
that one is not
behavioral traits, but it's neat seeing comment from the Reddit.
That's also not good faith. Moving on.
World active relationships are distances and energy. Everything else, every definition is subjective. In a way, then, the subjective, the mental world, everything.
Okay, this actually is very.
What kind of is the world?
Okay, hold on.
Official Soul Knight 6321 says the world is built of things, but the only true things are quarks. The only objective relationships are distances and energy. Everything else, every definition is subjective. In a way, then, the subjective, the mental world, is built from relationships between relationships. I included this one not because it was a critique, but because this is essentially my hypothesis with Classpecting. And it only got 3 likes. That's crazy. This is a really insightful comment. I think it's stated very clearly and concisely, and if I was smarter, I could put it that concisely, but I had to make a fucking hour-and-a-half long video about it. Next comment from Alamon Yo-Yo 69420. Oh, it's the numbers. Oh. Dualism and the dichotomies of aspects are very much a guilty pleasure. It definitely presents the aspects in an easier to understand medium, doesn't it? I want to talk about this comment because most of the people... So, when I made the video, I thought I was going to get more pushback about the dualism thing. People like dualism. They seem to. And even people I talked to in the video and later, like Aro Barista, who I connected with briefly, liked the graduation past dualism, which is very interesting. I didn't realize that. This is the only comment, really, that kind of defended dualism. And the argument is, it presents the aspects in an easier to understand medium. And I agree. But we can go further. And I wanted to, so I did. Video, I'm 1/3. I'm not going to read this whole thing.
Hold on. Let me skim this. Good faith, but too long.
Can be so time hope section. Time players seem to frequently have the tone of which great video. I haven't finished it at the time of writing. How the aspects view the others feels narrow. It's hard to say for certain what several feel about Doom because they don't talk about a Doom player at any point.
Yeah, this is just him. He already covered where the limitations were in his... Okay. So that covers everything from the follow-up that is actually relevant to what we're working on. So now, for the part that is unfortunately going to have to be manual. This quiz does not include classes. It includes, to use Karkat's sign for example, it includes astrological sign and sign grouping, lunar sway, and aspect. It does not include classes. So, this video, this next one, is about as long as the other one, but I'm going to be commenting more on it because I have to do a lot more effing work in order to get the Classpect analysis done properly. So, let's begin.
Hello, my name is Funk McLovin. You may recognize me from the many videos I've released over the years. This video is a continuation of the one I recently did on aspects from Homestuck. This video is about class. In a future video, I will discuss them together and how to diagnose them in a video about Classpects. Watching the other two is not a prerequisite to this video.
The actual Classpect video has not been released yet. When that video is released, we will go back into this document and alter things, as well as potentially adding more to the document. We're not sure on that part, but that is what's going on. So, continuing.
To those coming from the 2025 SockCon Winter Showcase, hello, welcome to the new year and welcome to my channel. During the video, we will discuss class, first from a canonical perspective, then view other analysts' ideas, until we finally synthesize everything into something new. There will be several times through this video when a long list of classes is explored one by one. During these times, take a moment to think about which class you're most excited to see discussed, but also think about a class that you may never have thought about before. If you would like a podcast version of this video while you're driving or doing the dishes or whatever the hell you do, I've made one available for free on Patreon, as well as a text version, which are both available in the description of this video.
Again, if you like what I am basing my Classpecting process off of, go give Funk McLovin at the very least a subscription here on YouTube, or if you can find a Twitch where they stream, go do it. Because, let's just say, I love this creator. I love how they've managed to also do a bunch of philosophical breakdowns of the core story beats and concepts within Homestuck, as well as some aspects of philosophy that Homestuck accidentally touched on without intending to varying degrees of success. So, go follow them. Anyway.
Classpecting has been a part of Homestuck since its very beginning. Homestuck's core appeal has always been a fandom playground, a place people can go to make their own fan trolls and creations on the works, and Classpecting is one of the most mysterious elements to that end. 12 aspects and 14 classes to sort Homestuck's characters into, like Hogwarts houses or bending elements, except more vague and conceptual. There's never been a codified list of classes or a quiz to sort prospective readers into classes, unlike the 2014 Extended Zodiac, which sorts characters into aspects. This left theorists like Optimistic Duelist and Dewdrop to speculate more heavily about them, and as such, class looms large over discussions of Classpect. Compared to the more orthodox aspect dualism, class is something like a free-for-all, taking the canonical words from Calliope and Andrew himself and extrapolating them into fascinating new theories. In the year 2025, though, things are different. Theorists are quiet. There is little discussion about these things. There are still some dedicated discussions going on, shout out to the Homestuck Discord's Classpect containment thread, but broad-scope pieces haven't been released in some time. What I have noticed the most from people discussing Classpect, especially class, is an assumption that class is in some way formulaic or direct. Recently I asked on Twitter, is Jesus a sylph? And while all the answers I got were very thoughtful and interesting, some of them were mired in reductionist thoughts, from mentions that muses and sylphs are often women. There are still some dedicated discussions going on, shout out to the Homestuck Discord's Classpect containment thread, but broad scope pieces haven't been released in some time. What I have noticed the most from people discussing Classpect, especially class, is an assumption that class is in some way formulaic or direct. Recently I asked on Twitter, is Jesus a sylph? And while all the answers I got were very thoughtful and interesting, some of them were mired in reductionist thoughts, from mentions that muses and sylphs are often women, or talk of how Jesus is too active to be a sylph. In other words, discussion seems to be mired in what limits someone in terms of their class, instead of what a class can open up and tell us about them. The fact of the matter is, up until now, discussion of class has been stiflingly limited. No matter how far I went with my research, I found people only willing to explain geometric configurations of classes into categories and systems instead of discussing class more openly. For every mention of Carl Jung, there was a failure to explain in depth how these theories related to extant psychology and analysis. This is the shackle that I wish to break, the shackle of simple illusion and straightforward categorization.
We're back.
Enter a world of myth and legend. There are more things than passive and active. Let me show them to you.
I do love the title of this part, Carl Jung's Festering Ghost, in which the external is internally analyzed. Yeah, Carl Jung is going to turn over in his grave hearing some of this shit. But that being said, I do apologize for the browser closing. Oh, okay, and you guys can't see it. Shit. Fuck. Let me fix that. There we go. All right. See, I'm a professional streamer. Duh. Anyway, that being the joke. Okay. I've got a Pastor Jim message I gotta check. Okay. Nothing serious. Let me get us back on track.
Before we dive ass first into the sucking void, let's make sure the diving board isn't going to snap off here, okay? What is a class? We use that word a lot, and you probably have some concept in your brain, but let's take a moment to wrestle that word into submission and make it tell us its secrets. Class, reflexively speaking, is the name given to the group of classes, which number 14. Muse, Lord, Bard, Prince, Rogue, Thief, Page, Heir, Mage, Maid, Seer, Witch, Knight, and Sylph. More on these in specific terms soon, but for now understand them as pieces of ourselves and pieces of the characters in the collective consciousness. Classes, much like the archetypes of the tarot or in Jungian psychology, are the unitary components of selfhood. In other words, the pre-existing cross-cultural templates for us to import into our own lives and behavior.
Or, in the case of Shin Megami Tensei lore, personas. Yeah, that is a thing. Moving on.
In simpler terms, they are blueprints we see in stories that tell us how to act. Each class is a monosyllabic archetype taken from myth and legend, the broad anachronistic pre-modernity of our minds. Jobs like page and knight aren't around anymore, and beings like muses and sylphs are of myth. They are the building blocks of self and character, bridging the gap between literature and psychology. Imagine each class as it exists as a faceless, nameless character, a character we, through the acts in our lives, consciously and unconsciously attempt to recreate. When our boss pisses us off and we steal some staplers, we are the righteous rogue. When a parent dies and bequeaths us a rare baseball card collection, we are heirs. When we type a Twitter thread defending our wives from the hateful mobs, we are knights. You get the idea. Even though we may embody part of a class at different times, our lives have classes that overarch them. When we say we are a class, we are saying that we most closely resemble one of the 14 archetypes in some way, to the point that we can be mistaken as them. We begin to try to actively emulate them, to construct moral systems to make us more like them. Being a class is acting like a class. Great. We know what class is now, but here's a better question. What is a class? As previously discussed, aspects in Homestuck are like music in many different ways, each one ripe for analysis. If aspects are the music theory in a vacuum, the classes are much more like the musical instruments, the instrument or method with which the characters and people use these aspects. A class, linguistically speaking, is attached to a person somehow, used both as title and name in and of itself. Characters are addressed as witch or air more than space or void. This means that a class is attached to a person, but the aspect is not. The aspect is something else that a person gains access to, much like someone using an instrument gains access to music they have not had in and of themselves. The question is, how intrinsic is class? In other words, do people choose their classes, or are classes inborn into people? Nurture or nature? In Homestuck, class is predetermined, but predetermination in Homestuck isn't necessarily indicative of intrinsic nature. In Homestuck, though predestination occurs, free will still exists because you still have to choose to do certain predestined things. You can choose not to, you'll just die in a doomed timeline. If this is true, that predetermination exists in step with free will, it means that people neither choose their class nor have it inborn. It means that people have a class that their free will naturally leads them into, a cosmic choice they make subconsciously. For a real-world example of such a trait, take Albert Einstein. Einstein, of his own free will, became a famous scientist. The fact that he is a scientist is the result of his free will, but it is just as much an intrinsic part of his being, because since he is dead, he is unable to become something else. Nikola Tesla was and always would have been an inventor, Marie Curie did and always would have discovered radiation, and Shakira did and always would have written Hips Don't Lie. Just in this way, John was and will always be the heir of breath, Dave was and will always be the knight of time, etc. Could a character's class change over time? I think it would depend on what kind of character or person they are and how much about them remains to be known. For example, it would be difficult to identify John's Classpect very early in Homestuck's story, since he does not exhibit many breath or air-related traits other than minor things. Going back to the Einstein example, it would be difficult to tell early in his life that he was going to become a scientist. There might be evidence, like perhaps he got good grades in math or science class, but his potential is hard to identify. Class is only easy to identify retroactively, taking a broad swath of factors into consideration, just like a profession or a quality would be hard to identify proactively. This means that a class must be analyzed with a totality of a character's story in mind. Applying class to a character necessarily applies a degree of predestination and immutability to them. Was Dave always a knight? Did Shakira's hips never lie? In summary, class is a complex and holistic analysis of a character into a fluid set of traits or behaviors that is further complicated by their relation to aspects. This implies numerous things. First, class is possibly malleable. Just as there are many diverse musical instruments, there may be diverse classes past that of aspects. Second, class is possibly transient. Just as someone can learn one instrument or another, one might be able to learn a class. This fits with other classes in video games. Third, class is possibly mutable. A character's class could change over their story. There is textual evidence for this. Finally, a class is possibly subjective. In other words, it is possible that unlike aspects, classes do not represent platonic ideals of nature, but instead social and societal constructs. Most existing analysis is devoted to the idea of passivity and activity in classes. This idea is suggested to us textually by Calliope. This is unlike the previous aspect video, where most canonical information came from the extended Zodiac and fan theorists. Now, a character within the actual text is acting as fan theorist. Meta. Calliope specifically is an interesting character to give us this information, and has certain important biases that come with the information she gives us, biases that we should deconstruct. What does Callie have to say about class? Between her discussions with Roxy and Dirk, we get some information from her about what a class is as it pertains to both of them. She reveals Dirk and Roxy's classes to them and explains those classes in the context of other classes, referring to passive, plus, and active, minus, classes, and their traits. She defines this delineation as active minus as exploitative for themselves, and passive plus allow their aspect to benefit others. She does say, however, that the distinction can mean various things. Here is her quote on the screen. Later, she also defines class as having counterparts, and defines thief and rogue, as well as bard and prince, as opposites, but doesn't inform us of any others. She also mentions certain verbiage that active classes destroy their aspect. Dirk, a prince of heart, equates this as his aspect means he is a destroyer of soul. There's another quote on screen. And finally, Callie also mentions the gendered nature of class, with the final quote on screen. While it would be disingenuous to dismiss Calliope entirely, her information is meant to be understood as revelatory more about her as much as about class. In other words, what is she telling the reader about herself in these passages? She makes a big deal about the active-passive dichotomy, which is meant to reflect her relationship with Caliborn. To her, someone who is embodied in a struggle for her own autonomy with a destructive personality, it's easy to see why she should rationalize class as a form of dichotomy. She's trying to construct a narrative about her own struggles. In practice, while there are active and passive moments from various characters, there are moments when characters act outside of this dichotomy. Roxy, for instance, a passive rogue, is instrumental in defying the Condus and actually strikes the killing blow. In Act 5, Rose goes grimdark and attacks Jack Noir, a passive seer, using highly offensive and destructive magic. Dirk Strider, an active destroyer, is soft-spoken and often lays low in favor of taking action, preferring plans and schemes. Comparing Dirk and Roxy, we see two characters who act very similarly in terms of their abilities. Both of them lay low and gather information before striking. Then they act on behalf of their friends and loved ones instead of out of selfishness. How can we call either of them passive or active at all? It seems very reductive. Next, we have Calliope's claim of gendered distinction. In spite of my initial rejection, this seems cogent in a social sense. In real life, a maid is generally considered a feminine job, whereas a prince is a male-gendered term. However, this distinction is not as ironclad as it makes it seem. In fiction, some terms like prince are sometimes subverted. Like in the Vampire the Masquerade mythology, prince is a gender-neutral term for ruler. It is more accurate to say that gendered classes have gendered associations, like professions in the real world, like nurse and teacher being feminine, in spite of sometimes being held by men. It's arbitrary, but there exists some bias. In other words, there could easily be a male maid, but it might seem odd to those around them who exist inside of a certain social order. What I mean by all this is we should not consider Calliope's analysis to be wrong, just incomplete. Much like Shakira's hips, Callie doesn't lie, but there is more to the story.
Hence why this chapter is titled Extant Tomfoolery. Yeah, and also word of the author on terms of class is unfortunately a lot more detailed than what aspects were. So here we go.
In a now archived Reddit AMA, Hussey answered some questions related to class. His answers shed more light on class and broadly align with Calliope's analysis with more nuance. Here's a quote. You could also look to the passive-active nature of the classes in making some retroactive sense of the Durst Prospect Dreamer duality. Passive-active classes are a pretty vague thing, and don't resolve so easily into simple dualities like defensive and offensive and such. There's more to the quote, but I'll continue. As stated before, though Callie offers a more rigid system, Hussey seems to take the active-passive dichotomy as more vague or even arbitrary. Hussey has more information relating to the Durst and Prospect to the active-passive dichotomy. More on Durst and Prospect later on. Unfortunately, Hussey doesn't give the audience much directly, but the lack of authorial information can actually tell us a great deal about Hussey's intent. It doesn't seem like something he put a particular amount of thought into, other than the general theming and structure. It's something he refers to as hyper-flexible.
Again, he did say more about class than he did about aspects, hence why there wasn't a section about what he said about aspects in the aspect video. But it's still not very much. Still a lot more, still not very much.
To me, this says that as an author, the system is meant to be vague and ill-defined purposefully in order to allow people to fill in the gaps themselves. That's why Callie didn't give us all the information about every class, just 2 of them. As such, analysis of class is less about trying to decipher what Hussey intended and more about constructing a system from the intentionally scant evidence, like a connect the dots with the numbers removed. You can make any picture you like. Optimistic Duelist's analysis videos, Hero Title, Parts 2 and 3, cover class, mostly the active-passive system, using much the same evidence as stated above, Andrew Hussey and Calliope. Mainly, OD sets the tone for most analysis that came later, with 3 main takeaways. 1, a connection to the psychoanalysis of Carl Jung. 2, an active-passive dichotomy with strong opposites, much like there are strong opposites in their aspect system. And 3, inversion theory, that each class has a contemporary and opposite class. In the previous aspect video, I railed against dualism, but dualism has more precedent in class, since Calliope and Hussey both explicitly state an active-passive dichotomy at play somehow. OD pairs each class into 7 groups, each of which has a passive and active expression. For instance, seers and mages are both magicians and prophets, but mages are active and seers are passive. The justification and evidence for each pairing, however, is lacking other than in intuition. Unlike aspects, which got confirmed geometric wheel arrangement, only a scant few classes have confirmed opposites, like Lord, Muse, Bard, Prince, and Rogue, Thief. The question for any theorist is, where are they drawing the necessary extrapolations in their systems from? If all of the active-passive sets aren't defined, how does one identify them? In OD's case, they draw from real-world examples in mythologies, such as tarot and archetype theory. This is all well and good, and leads us to a deeper understanding, but what can we do better? I discussed the first half of Ouroboros' video in my previous aspect video, so I'll address the other half now. Ouro's theory of class seems to mirror OD's, but the method they use to extrapolate missing information is very different. They compare class not to Jungian archetypes, but to role-playing in a story. A particularly poignant example of how class relates to aspect is how they describe the difference between a fireman and an arsonist, with two vastly differing approaches to the same aspect. In this hypothetical case, fire, the fireman destroys fire and the arsonist creates it, but you could conceive of them as having the same aspect. Like OD, their class symmetries exist along a passive and active line, but unlike OD, their opposites are described not using intuition, but using the verbiage of each class. For instance, they pair princes and bards as those who destroy. They pair maids and knights as those who serve. Critically, OD and Oro come to different conclusions about the actual symmetries. They pair different classes. In OD systems, knights are paired with pages, for instance. Again, something feels lacking. Oro mentions that other symmetries in class could exist, which invites the notion that undermines their and OD's analysis. Namely, that if symmetries can't be codified reliably, there cannot be a system of symmetry at all. How can we say which class is which class's inverse? In
And now for Dewdrop's redemption.
Dewdrop's Classpect brochure, by far the meat of their analysis is in class. There are some things that are beyond the scope of this analysis for now, such as the fan classes that they have invented, as well as certain notions about gendered classes that I disagree with for reasons listed above. Much like OD and Oro, they have a notion of verbing in class, in other words, analyzing a class through the lens that each class has a discrete set of verbs that define it. Calliope's example is that princes destroy, and similar verbiage can be applied to other classes. Like OD and Oro, they organize the 14 classes into 7 pairs, each given an overarching title. They make certain pairs that differ from OD and Oro, such as combining knights and pages into servants, but also pairing maids and sylphs as fae. Also like OD and Oro, they are scant with textual evidence, but their pairs do pass the intuition test as well as scrutiny. Unlike OD and Oro, Dewdrop treats the idea of class inversion differently than the passive-active dichotomy. An inversion isn't necessarily the aspect that it is passive-active counterpart. For instance, Dewdrop pairs princes and bards as an active-passive counterpart, but pairs princes and sylphs as inversions. Also unlike OD and Oro, Dewdrop has an exhaustive section on how certain classes can seem like other classes, role-playing falsely as them. All in all, the picture Dewdrop paints is one that has a very strong notion of a true self that is sometimes difficult to identify. They claspect their friends and peers through the work and attribute certain characteristics to them that are emblematic, especially when it comes to class. Though I do appreciate Dew's commitment to a more complex and thorough analysis, there is emphasis put on the trueness of the system that feels somewhat backwards. Essentially, there is an unspoken question in most of class analysis. Do we control our class, or does our class control us?
In other words, Dewdrop pretty much nailed the concept of classes, except for the fundamental contradiction of the nature of Homestuck's narrative. You are destined to make the choices that lead to the outcome that leads to your class. It is both predestination and free will in equal measure. And literally everybody who's done analysis on this topic has failed to notice that one fundamental aspect of the narrative in the process of creating it. Now, for the purposes of fan content, that's fine. Fanon exists for a reason, and different theories can lead to different stories. But accuracy? Yeah, no. The previous models mentioned fail the accuracy test. They do pass the intuition test, but they fail the accuracy test. Because again, predestination and free will both have to be taken into account in equal measure in order to properly place someone into a class. Moving on.
The latter seems to be true to most existing analysis to some extent, not only for Dewdrop, but more significantly in their case. I asked before, In a system that requires extrapolation for things that aren't explained in the comic, we need to get our extrapolation from somewhere. But what exists already in the comic that we don't need to extrapolate? Each class in Homestuck has certain representatives who we can glean information from. Some are more represented than others, which reflect the real-world quizzes on class, which makes me believe that the distribution of class isn't necessarily symmetrical. In other words, there are more seers than mages, and of those seers, they make more of an impact on Homestuck's story. By analyzing each representative and drawing similarities between them, we can more accurately identify what classes look like and how they are embodied. The following is a list of all of the classes in Homestuck with all of the representatives. Lord, Caliborn, Muse, Calliope. These two have one representative, so they are the most difficult to talk about, since there is no parallax between them and other characters. They are the master classes, which in many ways are superior to the other classes. This implies that not all classes are equal. Most specifically, both classes are associated with massive, overwhelming power. Lords through force, muses through influence.
Witches. Jade, Damara, and Pfeffery. Witches are all loners who have staggering powers. They aren't necessarily in the spotlight, overshadowed by others, but never overshadowed in power. Dangerous, but reliable. Witches are a force to be reckoned with.
Rogues. Rufio, Roxy, and Nepeta. Rogues are often lonely and often outside the social norm. Roxy and Nepeta both live alone and help their friends in ways that their friends don't necessarily ask for. They work alone, but they work for others. They're often misunderstood, but always try their best to be helpful. Heirs. John, Michuna, and Equius. Heirs are possibly the most diverse bunch. They're individuals in their own little worlds, but simultaneously help others immensely. They let the story happen to them, rather than actively seek out the story, but they still have a massive impact upon it. They're intuitive and don't question their own taste. Like John and Equius have legendarily bad heart taste. Seers, Rose, Kangri, and Terezi. Seers never shut the fuck up. They're opinionated talkers and observers who often take drastic action when they need to. They're instrumental in what they see as the big picture, sometimes to their detriment. Seers look like weirdos to those around them, but are undeniable. Mages. Solix and Mulin. Mages are wise old hermits. They're stuck in their ways, uninterested in things that don't align with their predispositions. Their predispositions are usually right, though. They know what's coming. They know what's what, and they're ambivalent about sharing it, but to those they open up to, they are beloved. Maids, Jane, Porim, and Aradia. Maids serve others. This is because they are passive people who require others to make use of them. They don't always like to serve, but when they do, they are passionate and powerful. Maid has wordplay with maid, which has the impression that they are made of their aspect and have inexhaustible reserves of it. Knights, Dave, Carcat, and Latula. Knights are similar to maids in that they are powerful and serve others, but they do so on their own power and autonomy. They're protectors, powerful and acute, but often blinkered, and have a tendency for workaholism. They pay the price. Sylphs, Arania and Kanaya. Sylphs are meddlers of the highest order. They believe they know what is right, and they're often correct. They are single-minded in fixing problems and have issues with black-and-white mentality. They are often healers, but they are not demure and methodical like doctors. They often have good and bad sides.
Pages. Tavros, Jake, and Horus. Page is most likely the most difficult class. They're defined by potential for change, but seldom get to enact that change. They're the most powerful in service of others, usually by coercion. They're defined, unlike any other class, by a lack. They have a great deal of growing to do.
Princes. Dirk, Eridan, and Kurlos. Princes, like pages, are fundamentally defined by their ambitions and skills. They are driven, opinionated, devoted, and forceful. They like having power, and they like using it. They are straightforward outwardly, but usually have deeply turbulent inner lives. Bards, Cronus, and Gamzee. Bards are unassuming, but influential. They're incapable of not being true to themselves for better or worse, often worse. Because of this whimsy, they are unreliable and often antagonistic, but always powerful and always impactful. Thieves. Mina and Vriska. Thieves are singular, maligned. Loners who have delusions of grandeur. They are fighters and strugglers. Their willpower is unstoppable. While sometimes bad at teamwork, they're often the only ones who can see through the bullshit. This is suitable for a definition of each class, and already we can see similarities and patterns forming. Using this information, let's see what we can dream up. Using this canon knowledge, we have a baseline understanding of each class and the job they do. Linguistically, what do these classes have in common? They're all anachronistic, but they generally refer to a vague past. All the professions named as classes are archaic ones. No one is a knight or a seer in this day and age. They harken back to a mythological time of monarchy and fable. They all relate back to something bigger, something ancient, each one having a different place with respect to each other. Imagine each class relating to an imaginary king who rules over them. The king represents authority and power, and each class relates to it differently. The king could stand in for a class's aspect, their story, or a specific character who they find influential. The king is the want and the drive in all of us. The king could also be conceptualized as a conductor to further the music metaphor from the previous video. For instance, how may a thief react to a king? It may see him as a tyrant or a treasure trove. A page might see a king as an aspirational and awe-inspiring figure. A prince may see their king jealously as someone in the way of their ambitions. Classes all take their names from antique archetypes, but each one has a different role. Lunar sway presumably affects the class a great deal. Broadly speaking, lunar sway is more straightforward than class, each one having to do with a person's or character's relation to a positive or negative emotion. In Homestuck, every character who awakens to a moon likes being there, so we can assume the moon we prefer is the one that holds our sway. More specifically, Prospit is associated with positive emotions, fairness, good society, and order, where Durs is associated with negative emotions, survival, bad society, and chaos. Each of the 14 classes, then, has a total of 28 possible permutations, 14 classes with 2 possible lunar sways each. In Homestuck, classes sometimes tend to result in like sway, but not always. For example, Nepeta and Roxy are rogues, both hailing from Durs. The pages Tavros and Jake hail from Prospit. This is not always the case, like with the thieves Vriska and Mina being from Prophet and Durs respectively. This means that some classes could lean one way or the other, but the 28 permutations still exist. Taking sway with class, we can call this the subclass. Not all 28 subclasses are represented in the work of Homestuck, so some of the descriptions will be informed by extrapolation. However, these descriptions will be as general as possible in order to preserve the idea that two characters with like classes, or even like classpects, could look very, very different. Prospit Lord. No in-text examples. A Prospit Lord at his best is an ambitious character who wishes to topple an unjust king. The Prospit Lord will work tirelessly because he believes he is the leader the world needs. His ultimate goal is to topple the king and rule in peace. A Prospect Lord at his worst is a spiteful, self-righteous despot, rewriting the rules in his favor. His ultimate goal is to topple the king and weed out what he sees as evil. Durst Lord. Example, Caliborn. A Durst Lord at his best is a fierce and totalizing force of nature who steers the world in a new order. The Durst Lord will move mountains to affirm their own ego. His ultimate goal is to kill the king and rule in his place. Most change their ego to suit the world. The Durst Lord changes the world to suit their ego. At their worst, the Durst Lord is bitter, petty, spiteful, and worst of all, supremely powerful. They are a fussing, crying baby on a cosmic scale. His ultimate goal is to kill the king and raise the kingdom. Prospect Muse. Example, Calliope. A Prospect Muse at her best is an astute chronicler and totalizing influence. The Prospect Muse catalogues everything she sees and doesn't miss a detail. No one can escape her absolute knowledge. Her ultimate goal is to steer the king to a better world. The Prospect Muse at her worst is a mistress of misinformation, using her privileged knowledge to skew truth itself. Her ultimate goal is to subsume the power of the king entirely, like a puppet. Durst Muse. No in-text examples. A Durst Muse at her best is seductive and charming spirit, giving and taking power as she pleases. She is everywhere. She is always watching. Her ultimate goal is to make the king want precisely what she wants. A Durst Muse at her worst is a petulant and vengeful beast who can not only destroy reputations, but force her enemies into evil. Her ultimate goal is to poison the king. Prospect Witch. Example, Jade. A Prospect Witch at her best is a cheerful and helpful scion of power. Reliable, trustworthy, and lovable, she can change the very winds. Her ultimate goal is to serve the king using her magic. A Prospect Witch at her worst is dejected, depressed, a liability. Her powers are too dangerous, too extreme. It cannot be trusted. Her ultimate goal is to hide away from the king who persecutes her. Durst Witch. Examples, Pfeffery, Demara. A Durst Witch at her best is friendly but jaded individual. She knows what's what, and she doesn't take any crap. She's powerful, and she knows how dangerous she can be. Her ultimate goal is to serve the king's court with a measured hand. A Durst Witch at her worst is paralyzed and scared. She fears her own power and cannot solve her own problems. Her ultimate goal is to run from the king's forces. Prospect Rogues. Example, Rufio. A Prospect Rogue at her best is merry and sly, cunning and skeptical. She gently leads people into realizing the contradictions in their lives and give excellent advice. Her ultimate goal is to steal from the king. A Prospect Rogue at her worst is spiteful and vindictive, slighted by the world, justifying her misdeeds as she goes. Her ultimate goal is to undermine the king. Durst Rogues. Example, Roxy and Nepeta. A Durst Rogue at her best is cunning and sweet, chronically on the run, and a loner. She's rejected by others but takes it on the chin and eventually finds her clan. Her ultimate goal is to take from the king and give to her friends. A Durst Rogue at her worst is a depressed loner without hope or prospects. She lives only to be hunted. Her goal is to flee from the king. Prospect Heirs. Examples, John and Matuna. Prospect Heir at their best are living their true lives. They love what they love without apology and would do anything to protect it. Their ultimate goal is to eventually replace the king. Prospect Heirs at their worst are confused and lost. Their choices have led them astray and they feel alone. They don't know how to get out of the woods. Their ultimate goal is to find the king. Durst Heirs. Examples, Matuna and Equius. Durst Heirs at their best are shrewd and stalwart. They're enthralled by their own power and wish to use it for good, but they realize there's a lot wrong with the world. Often misled, they're trying to make things better. Their ultimate goal is to be better than the king. At their worst, Durst Heirs are vindictive and vengeful, seeing the bad in the world without a cure, often lashing out. Their ultimate goal is to surpass their king. Prospect seers. Examples, Terezi and Cancri. Prospect seers at their best are masters of debate and philosophy. They know where things ought to be going, and they will advise accordingly. Their goal is to counsel the king. Prospect seers at their worst are disillusioned cynics who despise the world's order and offer critique without prompting. Their goal is to undermine the king's propaganda. Durseers. Example, Rose Lalonde. Durseers at their best are tacticians of the highest pedigree. They know what's coming and are planning 5 steps ahead. They don't let emotions cloud their judgment, but are also paradoxically prone to outbursts of anger. Their goal is to strategize the king's armies. At their worst, Durseers are wrathful schemers who don't care who gets poisoned if they get what they want. Their goal is to win the king's favor for personal gain.
Prospect mages. Example, Solix. At their best, prospect mages are serene hermits who dispense guidance to those who ask for it. They don't seek pupils and are often cryptic, but their power and guidance are undeniable. Their ultimate goal is to steer the king. At their worst, mages are embittered by life and wish to be alone. They withdraw and fail to share their wisdom. Their ultimate goal is to cut ties with the king. Durse mages. Examples, Solix, Mulin. At their best, Durse mages are behind-the-scenes workers who engineer the very fabric of reality as it is known. They work in the shadows to bring around the change they desire. Their goal is to influence the king through his kingdom. At their worst, they are chronic puppet masters who think they hold all the cards. Their goal is to control the king through subterfuge. Prospect maids. Examples, Jane Crocker, Porem Merriam. At their best, prospect maids are obedient and diligent, working tirelessly for what is right. They work for themselves, first and foremost. Their goal is to serve their king. At their worst, prospect maids are beleaguered and exhausted workaholics who have spite for those who they serve and never get thanks. Their goal is to earn praise for their king. Durse maids. Example, Aradia Megiddo. At their best, Durse maids anticipate the needs of those around them and fall into a role of a silent helper. They know you better than you know you. Their goal is to do the king's dirty work. At their worst, Durse maids are dejected and rejected, resented by those they serve. Their goal is to earn their king's respect. Prospect knights. Examples, Karkat Vantus Latula Pyrope. Prospect knights at their best are incapable of being facetious. They wear their hearts on their sleeves, and though their incredible earnestness, they win over others. Their goal is to fight for their king. At their worst, prospect knights are full of vindictive rage that doesn't go anywhere but at themselves and their peers. They don't get no respect. Their goal is to win the king's honor. Durse knights. Example, Dave Strider. Durse knights at their best are quiet protectors and effective servants. They would rather not fight at all, but they don't have the option. Their ultimate goal is to protect their king. At their worst, Durse knights are depressed and impotent. Without a reason to fight, they have nothing. Their ultimate goal is to find their king. Prospect sylphs. Example, Kanaya Merriam. Arania Circuit. Prospect sylphs at their best are intuitive listeners who always give the best advice. They're humble but have a reputation as meddlers and blowhards. Their goal is to advise the king. Prospect sylphs at their worst make dangerous designs and plan revenge. Their unchecked inner turmoil explodes outward. Their ultimate goal is to undermine the king who has slighted them. Durse sylphs, no in-text examples. Durse sylphs at their best are sardonic healers who aren't afraid of the ravages of battle. Seeing them when you're in trouble is a relief, but they're prone to I-told-you-sos. Their goal is to keep the king healthy. Durse sylphs at their worst are vindictive wielders of poison. Doctors, too, use knives.
Their goal is to poison the king. Prospect pages. Examples: Jake English, Tavros Nitrum. Prospect pages at their best are humble and ravenous for adventure. They're willing to put in the work to better themselves and do the right thing. Their goal is to impress the king. Prospect pages at their worst are dejected, depressed, and impotent. Without power, they cannot act. Their goal is to escape the king's dungeon. Durst pages. Horus. Durst pages are eager to prove themselves, to do deeds and feats and impress their own sense of justice. They're somewhat blinkered, but mean well. Their goal is to win the king's tournament. Durst pages at their worst wield rage impotently and miserably. They're exhausting to even be around. Their ultimate goal is to strike at a king who ignores them. Prospect princes. Kurlos Makara. Prospect princes at their best have a powerful sense of right and wrong. If might makes right, then the just must be mighty. They cannot be dissuaded or corrupted. Their goal is to be worthy to inherit the king's kingdom. Prospect princes at their worst are jaded and angry, striking out in ways where the ends justify the means. Their ultimate goal is to prove the king wrong about them. Durst princes. Examples: Eridan Ampera, Dirk Strider. Durst princes at their best are servants to their people and incorruptible leaders. They know how the sausage gets made and aren't afraid to get their hands dirty, fighting on the front lines. Their ultimate goal is to right the wrongs of the king. Durst princes at their worst are violent and blind, chasing down windmills. Their ultimate goal is to rebel against their king. Prospect bards. Example: Gamzee Makara. Prospect bards at their best are friendly and helpful, not always reliable, but never afraid. Their goal is to entertain the king. Prospect bards at their worst are sharp-tongued and cruel. They're the roadrunner being hunted by the coyote. Never ends well for the coyote. Their ultimate goal is to undermine the king. Durst bards. Cronus Ampera. Durst bards at their best are extravagant singers and poets, hungry for attention and always willing to raise spirits. They see the world for what it is. Their goal is to tease the king. At their worst, Durst bards weaponize their wits and lay traps. They're masters of the court and know the 48 rules of power by heart. Their ultimate goal is to overtake the king's court. Prospect thieves. Example: Vriska Circuit. Prospect thieves at their best are incorrigible spirits working outside the law to do what they believe is right. They're singularly potent and precise, and their influence cannot be ignored. Their ultimate goal is to take the king's riches. At their worst, prospect thieves are slighted and wounded by the social order and cannot tell a valid target from an innocent bystander. They hurt everyone. Their goal is to leave the king penniless. Durst thieves. Example: Mina Pisces. Durst thieves at their best are charismatic and sly, though too blunt to be true tricksters. They don't care if they're doing something wrong, and they often look out for their own, even if it might sink them. Their goal is to live apart from the king. Durst thieves at their worst are slighted, betrayed villains. They do not believe in an eye for an eye. They believe in a life for an eye. Their ultimate goal is to assassinate the king. Inversions are an essential part of classpecting, and the real meat of most class systems that exist. The issue is, everyone seems to have a different idea of what inversion is, only that class has some relation to the Jungian notion of the shadow. It's implied by Calliope that each class has a counterpart, but it's difficult to tell the intended counterparts other than the ones Calliope specifically states. Each system that attempts to establish class pairs comes to different conclusions. In Dewdrop's Classpect brochure, Draft 17, there is an extensive section in how certain classes can appear similar. They refer to this as the rubber band stretching before snapping back, and while they mean that one shouldn't misdiagnose their classpect, I take a slightly different meaning. All classes interact internally in various ways, through certain similarities between them. For instance, rogues and thieves are very similar in that they both steal.
Heirs and pages are both defined by their potential in some way. Similar themes emerge from many different classes, or as I would argue, all classes. Unlike aspects, which have vague, almost unknowable characters, classes have specifically and broadly overlapping character. The difference between, say, a witch and a mage could be as general as a gender difference or a preference of terms. Limiting symmetry to only pairs of active-passive members limits the analysis in what I hope is an obvious way. Why should there only be one class who is the opposite to a certain other class? The idea of a class inversion reflects the Jungian notion of the conscious and unconscious, the persona and the shadow. It also reflects the Gnostic ideas of the spiritual and material worlds, splitting a self into a mundane body and divine inner spark. There's been a great deal of moralizing regarding these notions, in that the shadow is often conceptualized as foreign or immoral, and the material world is seen by the Gnostics as illusory and transient. But ultimately these notions point to two different selves, the self we know and the self we do not. In us, there is a conscious spark which constitutes all of the conscious willpower we have control over. Our hands, our voice, our eyes, all of these are controlled by our willpower and desires. There is, however, a deeper unconscious part of us that controls our subconscious processes, such as blinking and breathing and becoming hungry. Think of these as the body self and the mind self. Each one is us in that our body and mind are both our own, and they are not independent, but they are different. The mind self is what can be understood as having a classpect as we imagine it, a class and an aspect someone uses in order to change the world, the lens through which they see things. However, there is also the body self's classpect, which can be understood as the inversion, a class and aspect that take charge when we attempt to suppress our needs and instincts. These often express themselves violently and angrily in times of distress, fear, and rage. When Rose Lalonde lashes out, she is acting with her body self. She is acting at the will of her suppressed shadow. When Dirk Strider, fearful and angry, cracks the lenses of Hal, his brother, he is acting in his frightened body self. In these moments, the subject acts out of step with how we might expect a scion of their class to do. A prince does not fear or doubt. A seer does not fight and rage. In these moments, we see other powers and abilities manifest themselves and must be understood as expressing a different class and aspect. In simpler terms, everyone has a class as well as an inversion as posited by Calliope. The way this analysis differs is that there could be many more ways to express these inversions than one direct inverse. A seer's inverse could sometimes act as a witch, but it could act as any class. A prince's inverse could be a page, but it need not be. Discovering your own shadow is not an easy process. If it were, there would be no industry for analytical psychology. As such, trying to assign yourself an inverse classpect is a very difficult process. We should also not conceive of these inverses as malignant or bad, because doing so would lead to further self-loathing and fear. That said, inversions usually only manifest during genuine moments of strife or as a person's worst instincts and fears. Suppressed desires, such as strong characters wishing secretly to be comforted, kind characters wishing secretly to be cruel, and willful characters secretly feeling weak and doubtful. The proper attitude to have towards an inversion is to desire discovery and acceptance, to look at yourself and say, maybe I do want to hurt someone, maybe I do have a feeling I'm ashamed of. Again, if this were easy, therapists wouldn't have jobs. This is also not to say that your dark impulses are correct, nor should be indulged, just acknowledged and not suppressed or shamed. In the following section, I will list the nefarious tendencies of each class, and define how it could be a shadow over your ego. The inverted lord is a tyrant, cruel and wicked, desiring power for its own sake. The inverted lord is felt by the powerless and the powerful, those who want to see others bow before them. To reconcile the inverted lord is to accept your desire for power as endemic to human life, and to allow your inner lord to relish the power you have over others without abusing them. The inverted muse is a lazy pillow princess, wishing for all of their needs to be met by devoted, thankless servants. They are a lounging goddess in the mind. They want to be served and give nothing back in return. To reconcile the inverted muse is to accept your desire for comfort and peace as endemic to human life, and allow your inner muse to savor every moment of lazy indulgence without wallowing.
The inverted witch is vengeful and sinister, wishing vindictive harm upon others. Curses, hexes, all manner of foul fortune must befall the inverted witch's enemies. The inverted witch is hatred incarnate. To reconcile the inverted witch is to accept your own deep despisal of others and to savor that hatred without succumbing to it. Let it pass through you.
The inverted rogue is the self-righteous kleptomaniac. Heart heavy with greed, the rogue takes first and justifies it to themselves later. They want what others have, sometimes foes, but often friends. They desire material wealth and will take it. To reconcile the inverted rogue is to accept that you have envy for those you love and savor material wealth and prosperity. The inverted heir is a crying baby, the immature spirit desiring comfort. The inverted heir feels an impossible-to-fill pit in their heart that draws on care and comfort. They desire things that are familiar and fearful of leaving whatever womb they've embedded themselves in. To reconcile the inverted heir is to acknowledge one's own lack and sate it without shame or without succumbing to it. The inverted seer is a sharp-tongued gossip who sees all and probes into affairs that do not concern them. They savor information like food and redistribute it in hushed tones. The inverted seer cannot help but stir the pot and gossip. To reconcile the inverted seer is to acknowledge a passion for gossip and to savor the juicy secrets when they are found.
The inverted mage is wrathful, angry, and furious being. Anger and rage for its own sake, a raise of blood pressure and addiction to being self-righteous. Any excuse to shout at someone is a good excuse to the inverted mage. To reconcile the inverted mage is to take proper pleasure in anger and to enjoy it, thus taking away its edge.
The inverted maid is a servile, submissive being, a desire to serve others, to be dominated and abused by them, a sick, twisted pleasure, and a tendency to find and appease broken people. The inverted maid has a trail of horrible exes who they cannot stop calling. To reconcile the inverted maid is to accept existential masochism and indulge in safe versions of those desires. The inverted knight is a sadistic and coldly cruel existence. A scoffing superiority to others, a sense that you are the only one who has it together. A tendency to treat others like fools, and to hold yourself above them, to serve them through condescension. To reconcile the inverted knight is to accept and appreciate the ways you are superior without becoming deluded. The inverted sylph is a fussing and uncomfortable xenophobe, an intense, burning suspicion of anything different, a passionate resistance to change of any kind. The inverted sylph is stuck in their ways and cannot escape their own squalor. To reconcile the inverted sylph is to acknowledge and enjoy routine and ritual without fearing your own boundaries. The inverted page is helpless and childish, immature and stupid. The inverted page hates learning, hates anything new, and indulges its most id-driven desires like food, games, and pleasure. It cannot be reasoned with and stands in the way of any ambition, accepting its lowly place. To reconcile the inverted page is to enjoy your pleasures and savor hedonism without succumbing to it. The inverted prince is envy and jealousy honed to a fine, subtle point. To those who despise others and wish to take from them. To climb high is not enough. Others must be knocked down. Grudges never leave the inverted prince. To reconcile the inverted prince is to accept ambition and to disregard comparisons to others, but to still savor their foibles. The inverted bard is sadistic and immature. It is the childish desire to tear wings from insects, to abuse those with less power than you like toys, to be smug and self-assured simply by nature of one's own superior station. The sadism of the powerful, a lack of care for the weak. To reconcile the inverted bard is to enjoy your power and to savor superiority without letting cruelty enter your heart. The inverted thief is the inflated ego, the self-love that crosses into worship. The thief loves the sound of their own voice and the fact that they have everything all figured out. Blind and deaf, they love only their own reflection. They never apologize and never regret. To reconcile the inverted thief is to love your own face in the mirror or your own words on the page while foregoing disdain for others. The question hanging over all Classpect analysis is, of course, how can I insert myself and my favorite characters into this system? I said before that a class cannot be diagnosed in the way we currently imagine it, but we can still apply these labels to ourselves and others, like masks a performer wears for a play. If you were in a band or choir, before you began to sing or play, someone likely asked you to select an instrument or a range. This question, like many questions in life, are criterionless. In other words, they are impactful decisions that will help shape your future that you have no way of comprehending when these questions are asked. As such, these selections can be made with spurious reasoning and tenuous details. When I was young, I chose to play the trombone because it was the one that looked the silliest, and the instructor told me that since you're tall, you'll be able to control it better. I spent the next 10 years of my life dedicated to an instrument that I chose on what was essentially a whim. Others in my band class chose even more spurious selections, things that suited them, things that didn't. Some students already had an instrument selected since they got private lessons from their parents. Whatever the case, a choice was made, and we worked to become more skilled at an instrument, not because it was ideal for us, but because it was the one we chose. An arbitrary choice that was committed to. In many ways, this criterionless choice is the one must make when selecting for themselves a class. Each class exists as something mysterious and impenetrable, a vague archetype colored by only other examples of those who have chosen those archetypes. The question, which class are you, is the question, which class do you want to be, expressed through a limited set of 14 pre-existing classes. The way to select a class is the same way that you would try on a piece of clothing or try on a new skill. It must be attempted without experience and naivete. It must be tried on like a mask, and skill must be built in it before you can judge it. You select one and become slowly changed by it, and discover if you've changed into someone you like. This is all essentially to say, you can just pick. Unlike aspect, which is a deeper and more varied analytical form, class is a set of archetypes that to some extent anyone could embody. In different parts of your life, you have probably felt Prince-like or Page-like, and if you haven't, you can at least empathize with the emotions of someone Witch-like or Seer-like. We understand these drives, we understand these emotions, they exist within us, in a template, in our genome. The idea of a mage or an heir is a shorthand, descriptive title existing before Homestuck, long before. They are patterns experienced in real life, overlaid on fantasy and fiction to construct a narrative. This is somewhat of a hot take, but while most analysts seem to understand classes as something specific, classes are not so direct. They are subtle and varied, subject to a person's own personal opinions on the roles they choose for themselves. Or put in another way, some trombonists become fine chamber musicians, and some become jazz artists, but they are all trombonists. A class can be identified and assigned essentially arbitrarily. Not much evidence is required. Evidence can be anything, from a linguistic flourish to the weapon the character uses to the color coding present. What are you trying to be? What is the character trying to be? Let's change our thinking here. What is a cat? A cat, of course, is a four-legged mammal with sharp ears. A good enough definition, but that description also defines a fox, does it not? What about a four-legged mammal with a short nose with sharp ears? Well, perhaps, but some cats have blunt ears. In this way, linguistic definition is actually very difficult to accomplish. Cat is a broad category, which a singular definition doesn't fit over. It's not hard to do this with any class of thing. Chairs, tables, dogs, trees, all of these things have categories that are recognized not using specific sets in and of themselves, but recognition and association. Put more simply, you know these things when you see them. There is no calculus to be done to identify a cat. You recognize it without hesitating. Therefore, a class of things can be understood not as a cluster of definitions, but something you build your skills in recognizing. How is this skill built? by inspecting members of a class and figuring out what they have in common, so one can figure out how to spot more in the future. For instance, most trees have leaves, most trees have bark, most trees are tall, most trees burn. Not all trees have all these traits, but seeing a plant with bark and leaves, we can see a tree. Or seeing a plant with leaves without tallness, we might re-identify as a bush. Earlier in this piece, I have identified all canonical examples of members of certain classes, but we can go further. In myth and stories, there are examples of seers and mages that we can use to further figure out just what it is meant by these things. Let's build a better understanding of each class through mythological and historical example. Lords. Lords in myth and media are singularly dominant. Characters say "my lord" to refer to their masters, and the title Lord of X is bestowed on figures that are supreme in some fashion. Lord is a status requiring great respect and fear. Lord is used to refer to gods and goddesses, notably God the Father of the Old Testament, a feared and revered deific being. Muse. Muses in myth are seductive and consuming as well as sexual. When a character refers to something as being their muse, they mean that character is inspiring and captivating in a singular fashion. Muse is derived from the Greek musa, and then the Latin musa, meaning a deity who inspires. Inspirational and captivating figures are associated with the divine. If God the Father is a lord, the God the Holy Spirit is a muse, inspiring and suffusing followers' lives. Mage. Mages in myth are associated with magic and wisdom. Other terms meaning mage are the plural magi and the archaic magus. The three wise men in the New Testament Bible are referred to as the magi in some translations. Magi are sometimes mystical, often reclusive, and always learned. The owl is a common symbol of wisdom and solitary nature. Yoda and Gandalf are examples of mages, characters with great power and a tendency towards solitude. Seer. Seers are common figures in ancient Hellenic history, both in myth and their real lives as an occupation. The oracle at Delphi is a famous example. Oracles are not the only example, as seeing has been used to mean future sight with figures like Odin from Norse tradition, and Moirai in Hellenic tradition. Seers are obscure and odd, represented by the Norns and the Moirai. Other examples include Cordelia Chase from Angel, who sees visions of future tragedy, and Imhotep, the 3rd millennium BC chancellor and mythological god. Witch. Witches are often marginalized in modern media, from the Salem witches to the Wicked Witch from Oz, even though Glinda calls herself a witch too. Witches are associated with femininity and nature, strong and weirding women who are often maligned but just as often resorted to in times of trouble for cures and ailments. In Arthurian myth from the Anglo-Saxon tradition, the witch Morgan Le Fay is a figure of great power and uneasy evil. Ravens and other corvids are associated with witches. Joseph from the Bible is an example of a more masculine witch, a man who has mysterious powers bestowed by God, who is often wrathful. Heir. The term heir is still used today, as is inheritance, from which the name comes. Heirs inherit fortunes and sometimes do not deserve these gifts, but often grow into ownership. Air in Homestuck also has some wordplay with air, as in the air we breathe. King Arthur is a classic example of an heir, a boy who pulls the sword from the stone and inherits the title of king. Heirs are associated with kings and other kingly symbols, like the lion and crown. Luke Skywalker, though not a king, inherits his father's gifts and must grow over the course of the films. Knight. A knight summons very direct associations in the Western world. Armored fighters, usually from the Renaissance and Middle Ages, who defended kings. Knights could also be understood as soldier, and could refer to many different soldier archetypes, such as Japanese samurai and Roman legionaries. Swords are a heavy symbol across all cultures, or, in more modern times, guns. Weaponry used to defend rather than to conquer. Knights and samurai also have a strict code that members rely on. The knight Lancelot from Arthurian legend, Don Quixote from the literature of Cervantes, and even mythological figures like the gargoyle use physical violence to defend. Page. Often related to the knight, a page is understood as a knight in training. Training and potential are heavily emphasized. The page stands out among the classes as it's the only seemingly explicitly transitory class. Pages don't stay pages in media. Pages are also associated with foibles and mischief, often clumsy. Still, they often are positioned to see past the institutional dogma, unlike their betters. Goku, especially in early Dragon Ball, is an example of a page, a trainee. Paul Atreides is also a page, someone who reaches for and in some ways fails to reach his potential. A more esoteric example of a page's devious side is Sisyphus, tricking Thanatos and Persephone. Thief. Thieves loom large in media. They are outlaws of any stripe that does not immediately discount sympathy. Anything from pirates to the gentleman thieves like Arsène Lupin and the Scarlet Pimpernel. Thieve is a synonym to steal, and as such we could also consider Prometheus, the stealer of fire, to be a thief. But the line between rogue and thief is very thin. A more solid example of the thief is Dracula, a man who must drink blood to survive. Wolves and other devious hunters are often associated with these tricksters. Rogue. Rogues and thieves are almost the same, but the primary difference is the selfishness and earnestness. Thieves are outlaws because they are avaricious. Rogues are outlaws because they cannot countenance the social order. Robin Hood is the most classic example, giving to the poor and stealing from the rich. Roguish good looks is a common phrase referring to the confidence and slyness of a rogue. Rogue in more commonplace parlance often refers to any charming outlaw. Foxes are associated with rogues. Maid. Servants of any kind could be associated with maids. Butlers, handmaidens, manservants, or even a caddy. Maids serve and do it dutifully, usually admiring their masters to some degree. Who would Jeeves be without Wooster? Maids have a dark side, though, and when their master goes astray, they are not above admonishing and even punishing them. Not always submissive, but always reliable. Not all maids are explicitly servants. Bulma, in Dragon Ball, invents and uses ingenious inventions to serve her more powerful and capable friends. There are numerous helpful fae and sprites who serve, such as the story of the cobbler. Maids also have some wordplay in Homestuck with maid, as in being made of something. Sylph. Sylph, or sylphid, is an arcane term, perhaps more than any other class term. Sylph is rather vague, referring in folklore to a spirit inhabiting a dead body, or a spirit of the air, but they are usually transient ghosts. In Homestuck, they are understood as healers, but more accurately, they have an association with alchemy, due to the writings of Paracelsus. Sylphs are supernatural and mysterious, and usually benevolent. Jesus Christ in many ways reflects the Homestuck conception of the sylph as a mysterious fae-like healer. Osiris of Egyptian myth could also be understood as a sylph, the god of the dead who works in subtle ways. Prince. Most directly, the prince is the son of the king. Princes are understood as dominant, but also slightly childish and inexperienced. There are many princes from myth and real princes. Thor, son of Odin, the naive god and hero. Hercules, son of Zeus, mighty hero with a lot to prove. Zeus himself is something of a prince, and often an immature king, son of despot Cronus. Princes in Homestuck don't denote royalty, but the chip shoulders and dominance remain. Bard. We all know Bard from Dungeons & Dragons, the fun musician class with creative spells and interesting interactions. Bards through history and myth are storytellers and weavers of narrative. Bards like Orpheus, who sing so beautifully and inspire others. Gods like Kvasir of the Norse tradition of poetry and wisdom. Bards as an occupation marry the mundane with the transcendent, the bridge between myth and people. They're heavily associated with music and art, as well as eccentricism. The amount that classes and their names associate with real-world examples of their names is unclear in Homestuck. For example, John is called an heir, but his father is just kind of a regular guy. John does inherit things from his dad, like the shaving cream in his car, but I doubt we would call him an heir in the common parlance. If we were to attribute a more modern archetype on John, it might be something like nerd or geek, since he's into computers and games and whatnot. Class, then, does not have a direct relationship with these archetypes, more like a vague association based on how they act in a story. The last video in this series, the video on Classpects, taken together, will discuss this more in depth. For our purposes, we can just say that a class is more subjective, broadly speaking. If these classes are so subjective, then could there possibly be other classes? Broadly, other theorists are open to this idea, with Dewdrop in particular codifying a few in their analysis. In Homestuck itself, there are actually other canonical classes, such as Gent, embodied by the unnamed Spurb player Nana speaks to, and Waste, the class Andrew Hussey assigned himself. As such, I don't think it's very far-fetched to say there could be other classes and other associations that could be constructed, but this analysis is going to be limited to a discussion of the main 14. This flexibility is another reason the geometric passive-active dichotomy is difficult for me to accept. The 14 classes in Homestuck being embodied by more than one character each, except for the Cals, implies to me that each class is a baseline class and is exhaustive in the way that it defines the spectrum of possible classes. In simpler terms, the main 12 are the normal classes, with Lord, Muse, Waste, Gent, etc. existing outside of this, with Muse and Lord being the master classes from which the others spring. Class and aspect have now been discussed in exhaustive detail. I've taken them apart one after the other, like this, in this order, so that I might explore them in their own existence, but there remains one part that has been unspoken. Class and aspect are not independent of each other in the comic of Homestuck, nor in most analysis. Therefore, the next and final part in this series is going to be a video about Classpect as a unit, how one informs the other, and the all-consuming question, which Classpect are you? This video began with a thorough explanation of what class is, what writing exists about it, and finally my own new thoughts and opinions. The aspect video was heavily themed around music, but this class portion doesn't have any one particular theme emerge of that nature. Class seems to have more to do with society and archetypes than any vague metaphor that I could construct. This material, though somewhat pretentious and heady, is not made only for myself, of course. This knowledge has the ability to open doors into the self that could not be opened by aspect alone. Do you see yourself differently now that a broader picture of class has been drawn? What vices do you see in yourself after discussing inversions? Hopefully, you've reached a new conclusion and a better picture of who you are through viewing pictures of others. That is the human condition, after all. Alright, that's all I have to say until next time. If you'd like to spread the word or support me in my future endeavors, please do so at patreon.com. My blog is hosted for free on Patreon, so there is plenty of free stuff available outside of the paid benefits. Thanks for watching. I love you.
I was going to continue this, but unfortunately the body is forcing us to go to bed. Alright. Again, I'm sorry. We are going to have to call it quits and make it short. I will see everyone who makes it tomorrow. And just hoping that everything works out in that regard. This is what happens when you work more than 40 hours a week. And one of those days happens to be a 12-hour shift.